9 people? That's a lot. It feels like a whole baseball team. When I was young, I always dreamed of having a cute house with a white dog, just like in storybooks. But real life isn't always so nice. I finally got my own house, but when I came back from work, it was full of people, like a dormitory. I'm not happy about it. My name's Mary, and I'm 32 years old. I work in an office. I've been really focused on my job, but lately, all my friends have been getting married one after another. Buying wedding gifts has been expensive. I started feeling like I needed to find someone too, so I started going on dates. Mary, when are you going to give me grandkids? Every time I went home, my dad David would ask this, and it made me really uncomfortable. So, I started visiting less. My mom died when I was young, so I grew up with my dad, my brother, and my grandparents. My brother got married early and lives near our old home. He has 2 daughters, my cute nieces. I already have nieces at my brother's. Isn't that enough? But we always argued about it. Then my dad got in a car accident. When I reached the hospital, he was in bad shape. He passed away quietly while my brother's family and I were there. Dad, I wanted you to meet someone. I had a boyfriend introduced by a friend. He just proposed and we decided to marry. He liked to show off a bit, but he was kind. His name was Richard. Now that both my parents are gone and my brother has his own family, it does feel lonely, doesn't it? I said softly while petting my cat Lucy, just back from the funeral. Mary, you're not alone. You're part of my family now, Richard said, holding my hand gently. He was worried about me and came to check on how I was doing. Let's make a happy home together, I thought. Maybe I could find simple happiness. Little did I know what was coming. Welcome. It's a bit crowded though. I went to Richard's family home for a meeting. Patricia, his mom, was lively and straightforward. I felt a bit nervous walking in, thinking it would just be his parents, but there were lots of people. In-laws, step-grandparents, Richard's brother Charles, his wife Sarah, and their kids Thomas and John. Nice to meet you. That's a big group. The house, built by Richard's dad James, was a bit old and worn, but the family was so welcoming, it calmed my nerves. On the way home in the car, I mentioned how many people there were. Christmas or Thanksgiving must be quite something, I said to Richard, who chuckled in response. It really is crowded. I can't believe they live like this every day. I was genuinely surprised to hear this. Richard's family home was never big, and I thought it was just for gatherings. 8 people in that house, wow, Richard said. Originally, it was just his in-laws and step-grandparents. But then Charles, who couldn't keep a job, moved in with Sarah and their kids without asking. Charles will probably move out once he finds a job, Richard said, laughing. Back then, I thought Richard's family just had some challenges. After we got married, Richard and I, along with our cat Lucy, lived a peaceful life without kids yet. Richard helped around the house, and Lucy liked us. Charles and his family still lived in that crowded house. The walls were covered in children's drawings, and Patricia laughed, saying she stopped trying to clean them long ago. Sarah, Charles's wife, always looked tired. She was older than Charles and close to my age, so we became friends quickly. Hey Sarah, hurry up. Mary, don't just stand there. We're out of beer. Whenever I visited, it felt like Sarah and I were the only ones not sitting down. We were always busy, and I wondered if this was our fate. But the idea of Sarah doing this every day was scary. Sarah worked full-time to make up for Charles, who didn't work much. I was hesitant, but I finally asked, have you thought about leaving him? I've thought about it. It's tough. But we have kids, and he used to be kind, Sarah replied. I couldn't see any good in Charles, but I guess they had their reasons. That's what I thought. Around this time, Richard suggested, how about we build our own house? I was surprised but happy. I've always dreamed of living in a cute house like in storybooks with a white dog in the yard. I had never told anyone, but when I told Richard, he said, that sounds great. We spent our free time visiting model homes, choosing a builder, and a year later, our dream home was ready. We need to keep up with the mortgage, Richard said. Definitely, I replied with a smile. On the first weekend in our new home, Richard's family came over for a housewarming party. Here, Joseph, give them the gift. We're coming in. Oh, what a nice house. Patricia seemed really happy, like it was her own place. I smiled politely. Look, it's a party. Then Joseph handed me 2 cans of beer like he just bought them. Charles wandered around and found our bedroom, saying, this bed is so comfy. He jumped on it, and the kids joined in, getting excited. Look, there's a cat. They ran around chasing our cat, Lucy. Lucy is friendly, but she's never met so many people at once, so she got scared and hid in the back of the room. Poor Lucy. I looked at Charles and Richard, who were already busy with the party. Mary, Patricia wants appetizers soon. Can I use your kitchen? And sorry about scaring Lucy, Sarah said, feeling bad. Why is someone as nice as her with a guy like that? I care for Sarah like a sister. I'll take care of it, Sarah. You relax, I said, but she still helped with cooking while managing the kids. The step-grandparents were quiet, almost like dolls, not saying much. But they said, "Nice home, right, James?" "Yeah, sorry for the noise," James replied, even though the loud ones were the in-laws. The step-grandparents were the sensible ones in that house. So the odd ones were the in-laws, Charles, and probably my husband Richard too. After that, the in-laws and Charles started coming over almost every weekend. They partied loudly till dawn, and we got complaints from neighbors and even the police. Once Sarah, the step-grandparents, and the kids hadn't visited since the housewarming, but the in-laws put me to work without hesitation. I was really stressed out. Richard also started showing his true colors. Once, when I had a cold and asked him to pick up dinner, he came back with hamburgers. "I can't eat this right now," I said, feeling weak. Instead of getting mad, Richard said, "You need to eat to get better, Mary." What if I had the energy to eat that? I wouldn't have asked for help, I thought to myself. Once, when Richard was sick, I sarcastically asked if he wanted a hamburger. He got upset and said, "No, that's ridiculous." In short, this family was selfish and lacked empathy. They were in for a wake-up call. Enjoy your freedom while you can. You'll get what you deserve, I thought with a wicked smirk. A few days later, I had a business trip planned. "I'm off," I said happily to Richard on the morning of my departure. "Is your trip today?" "Sarah's also away on business," Richard said. "Really? I didn't know. What a coincidence," I replied. "Mom said they'd be in trouble without someone to take care of the house." Richard laughed mockingly, making me think he was being mean. I was busy during my trip. Days went by quickly, and before I knew it, a lot of time had passed. A big typhoon hit, and I contacted Richard. "We're okay, but the family home had some serious leaks," he said. I understood, thinking about their old house. The day I came back home arrived. As I walked from the bus stop, I heard loud laughter in the neighborhood. Is someone having a barbecue? It's so loud. The neighbors will complain. Wait, what? I was shocked. The noise was definitely coming from my house. As I cautiously opened the door, I found bags in the entrance and graffiti on the walls. I was stunned. "Hey, Mary, welcome back," a drunk Richard said. Frustrated, I went to the living room and found drunk in-laws and Charles while Sarah made food in the kitchen. The step-grandparents were quiet, and the kids were drawing on the walls. There was also a woman I didn't know. Overwhelmed, I tried to stay calm. "What's going on?" I asked Richard. "Didn't I tell you? The family home had leaks, so they're staying here for a while," Richard said. "Who was away?" The in-laws, Charles and Richard, decided, "Why don't we live here?" Richard proudly suggested. Even with this explanation, I was stunned into silence. "It's okay. We're family. We have extra rooms." "No problem," the in-laws added, smiling. "Don't worry, Mary. The walls got a bit dirty, but it's just kid stuff," Charles said casually. "And who is that woman?" I asked about the woman on the sofa, playing with her phone. "Oh, that's Karen, a friend of me and Sarah," Richard explained. "Yes, that's right," she said with a smile. This girl, Karen, was kicked out by her parents, and Richard said she could stay. "Thanks in advance," Karen replied, leaving me utterly confused. In our not-so-big living room, there were 9 adults and 2 children. The room was messy, with scribbles on the walls far from the new house look. The family was loud like a dormitory. I couldn't help but lose my temper. Seriously, 9 people is too many. Are you guys planning to start a baseball team or something? Then I realized something. "Hey, where's Lucy?" I asked, but no one knew where our cat was. Dad opened the window to smoke, and Thomas said Lucy ran away. Charles looked at him angrily. "What were you thinking?" "I told you to be careful with the windows," I said, nearly in tears. Richard, looking annoyed, said, "It's just a cat. We can get another one. If you're unhappy, we can just get divorced," he said with disdain. "You said divorce?" I asked. "Yes, I did. I might not if you apologize," Richard said confidently. "Oh, really? Well, then, here, write this," I said, slamming down the divorce papers I had prepared. My section was already filled out. I got my bags from my room. Why haven't you written it yet? I'm busy, I said coolly to Richard. They were shocked. Angrily, Patricia said, Richard, divorce her already. We've built the house, so she's useless now. Realizing too late. Richard said, you'll regret it. But I had no regrets. You're the one who'll struggle. Just write the papers, I said, taking them and giving some to Charles. He laughed. When did I marry you? Looking at the filled wife's section, Charles said, Hey, Sarah. This is Sarah, coldly. I'm divorcing you right now, Sarah said firmly. Charles exclaimed, Sarah bites the hand that feeds you, huh, Joseph? He was talking nonsense. From my perspective, Sarah had been treated like a servant in her in-laws' house. Charles took most of her earnings, leaving little for living expenses. This allowed Charles to do whatever he wanted, and the woman in front of me was Charles's mistress. Mary, I think my husband is cheating. Sarah had confided in me before we planned our divorces. Sarah endured it for her children, but Charles started selling their belongings. She reached her limit. Sarah told me everything. Furious, we started planning our divorces. Sarah gathered evidence of the affair. Her recent business trip was a lie. We looked for a new place to live halfway. Like me, Sarah had no family to turn to, but a friend offered her a job in another state. It was a good opportunity, and our preparations went smoothly. All that was left was presenting the divorce papers. I want to get out of that hellish house, Sarah said, determined. She had a strong core but had been manipulated by her in-laws. Thinking it would be suspicious to return together, Sarah went back first. She soon contacted me, informing me about the takeover at my house and Charles's mistress moving in. All our actions until then were a performance. Knowing what was happening, I told Sarah, we're not living there anymore. Let the kids draw on the walls all they want. That's what I told her. Charles, thinking he could openly live with his mistress, happily signed the divorce papers. Let's go, Sarah. James and everyone, it's time to leave. The step-grandparents stood up and followed Sarah and her children to the door. Living with people like you, I had given up on life. But Sarah opened my eyes, James said, glaring at the family, and left with his great-grandchildren. The in-laws had been taking money from the step-grandparents' pensions. They were truly awful. Well then, take care, we said as we left. You'll regret this, the family laughed, but we ignored them. Months later, Richard contacted me. Oh, I forgot to block him. I could guess the content of the call, so I answered, Mary, come back. Richard sounded desperate. I barely contained my laughter. Come back, we're strangers now, I replied calmly. Let me talk, Mary. What do you mean? Why aren't you paying the mortgage? Patricia's voice came through, probably snatching the phone from Richard. What are you talking about? I have no idea. I played dumb while Patricia sounded frustrated. Apparently, the mortgage for the house had fallen behind last month. When I pressed Richard, he claimed I hadn't been paying it. What an inconvenience. While I remained silent, Patricia kept talking like a machine gun. First of all, this house, you guys had a combined income of $755,000, right? We could have built a better house. We built this as a new home, but it's not what we expected. Originally, they had planned to take over the house. Sarah had informed me of their discussions. Yes, that's true. But with Richard's $30,000 salary, the bank wouldn't lend us more. If we had taken a joint mortgage, maybe we could have gotten a better house. Hearing this, Richard, you lied. I could hear Richard and Patricia arguing on the phone. I ignored them, ended the call, and finally blocked his number. Richard had a pretentious personality. He always wanted to impress others, especially outside his family. When he suggested building the house, I already had divorce in mind. I told him a friend's husband got a mortgage on his own. How cool is that? I heard these stories like a spell. Richard, wanting to show off, opted for a solo mortgage. I had to hold back my laughter. He probably didn't tell his family because he was afraid of them knowing the truth. But I didn't care. The house was built to Richard's taste. I had no attachment to it anymore. Richard hadn't cheated, but there were no alimony penalties in our divorce. So despite him, I left him with the mortgage debt as my revenge. Let him suffer, and I was able to rescue Sarah, whom I cared for like a sister, from that house. That was my main goal. Later, they couldn't pay the mortgage, and the new house was repossessed. But it was a mess inside, with scribbles everywhere and walls yellowed by cigarette smoke from Charles and his mistress. It didn't look like a recently built house. Richard had to rent a cheap apartment, and Joseph and Patricia ended up moving in with him. They'll probably never leave him alone like parasites. I don't care. They're strangers to me now. The only good thing about my former in-laws was that the children weren't affected. Otherwise, they were the worst. Sarah, as Charles' ex-wife, successfully claimed alimony through a lawyer. She had to borrow money but managed to pay it off. I'm glad for her. Charles and his mistress became outcasts in their community and are now missing. They haven't repaid their debts, confirming how awful they are. Sarah is happily working at her friend's place. Her kids are doing well too. I hope they find happiness this time. James and Barbara seem brighter now, like a weight has been lifted. They sold the old family home and are enjoying their retirement in a distant place with their savings. That's great news. As for me, I've requested a transfer to a local office. I was reunited with Lucy, my cat, thanks to social media. Someone in the neighborhood had found and taken care of her. It's good she's friendly now. I live alone in my late father's house with my brother's approval. I'm saving to build my dream house, and someday I hope to introduce someone special at my father's grave. Today, I'm working hard towards that goal.
My name is Kate. Life's got a real funny way of showing you who's boss. Just a short while back, I'd tell you I was hitched to James. You'd see me coming down the hall, with that just married kind of glow. I had faith that quitting my gig at Laurentech for our marriage was the smart play. Love trumps a paycheck, right? Laurentech was this quirky joint. God knows, they had more rules than a prison. One of them serious deal breakers was about family. James put a ring on it and, boom, we're suddenly in the hot seat. Bossman Joe pulls us in, hands us the ultimatum like we're on some second-rate game show. One of you's gotta roll out, he said, face as serious as a heart attack. We had a back and forth that night that would have made for prime reality TV drama. I guess love made me a little stupid. I blinked first and tendered my papers the next day. Threw in the towel on my up-and-coming tech career to play house. If I knew then what I know now, well, ain't that just life's tagline? Flash to today, and here I am sweeping up cereal because Mr. Promotion on the horizon can't find it in his heart to aim for the bowl. Jim, your mother teach you that? I called out to the other room, my voice getting lost somewhere in the drywall. What's that? He shot back, voice all tight, like my question was a personal attack. Never mind, I muttered, letting it drop. Not worth the hassle. Used to be we could rib each other. Now every word's like stepping on a landmine. Lovely, huh? 2 hours later, he's on the couch, all zoned out in front of the TV, and I'm assessing the remains of what used to be us. We gonna talk or you planning on marrying the couch? I said. James didn't even bother looking my way. About what? I counted to 10 in my head. I dunno, how about us? Where this train wreck's heading? He shrugged. Thought we were good. We stewed in that silence for a while, the TV chattering away to itself. Then it hit me, the realization I'd been living in a glass house someone else threw a rock at. Everything we built, up in smoke, and neither of us knew how to stop the burn. It's funny, ain't it? How fast a life can turn on its head. One day you're planning forever, next day you can't even chat about the weather without it turning into World War III. I stood there a while longer, looking at the man on the couch. He was as familiar as a stranger on a bus. The transition from indifference to cruelty was subtle, but I felt it. It was in the cooling air of the disbanded summer and the sting of a slight wind. Things started changing, like the weather. In the kitchen, I stood there thinking about how things used to be smooth and easy. But now? It felt like walking on ice, unsure if you'll stand or fall. I knew the kind of steak James liked, rare and yet not too bloody, salted and peppered with precision. I had it down to an art, but that day, the oven betrayed me, or maybe it was the other way around. James walked in from the living room, the sound of his heavy footsteps warning me of the mood he was in before he even entered. A second later, there he was, filling the doorway, his eyes taking in the spread as if he was about to pounce on it and tear it apart with his hands rather than sit down to eat like a civilized person. What's this? He pointed at the plate. Your job too tough for you now? His voice was like gravel, rough and scraping. I knew to tread carefully. It's just a bit cooler than usual, James. The steak, I mean. It's not. Not what? He cut me off, glaring. I bit my lip, not saying what was on my mind, because voicing it out loud would only make it worse. Look, Kate, he said, his voice lowering, like that of a predator hiding in the shadows. When I say I want my steak hot, I mean I want to feel the animal's soul leaving the body when I cut into it. This, he tapped the steak with the back of the fork, and it sounded like a judge's gavel. This is dead twice over. He didn't yell, but his voice had a sharpness to it that made my skin crawl. It was almost clinical, detached yet loaded with a venom that was reserved just for me. No loud scene, no drama for the outside world, just the cold, hard words that cut through me. I stayed silent, knowing anything I said would just fan the flames. He pushed the plate away, and his downcast eyes met mine, full of something icy. Son of a, you know what, forget it. He turned his back on me and the food. I'm not eating this crap. He grabbed his keys from the bowl by the door, his movements jerky. Fix your mistakes, Kate. Or next time it'll be more than just dinner in the trash. The door slammed, a period mark to the tail end of the happiness we used to have. I was left there, staring at the closed door, the click of the latch loud in the quiet of the apartment. As his footsteps faded, I let out the breath I was holding. The steak. It just laid there, looking as forlorn as I felt. The trash can was the next thing I'd have to face, a cold reminder of my mistake. Throwing it away felt like I was tossing a part of myself with it, my effort, my care, my desire to make things work. But none of it seemed to matter. Perfect, they called us. His parents, our friends, they all admired the facade we put up. But behind closed doors, the story was different. Demands grew as my self-esteem plunged. James' favorite pastime became scrutinizing every corner of the house, every dish I prepared. I had no job, no income, just him and his approval, which became scarcer with each passing day. And on the nights his parents witnessed an act slightly less convincing than usual, the sofa was my cold reminder of failing to play the doting wife. Tonight was no different. The dinner table was set for two plus his ever-judging eyes. What's this? James's voice was flat, pointing at the steamed broccoli. Dinner, I replied, keeping my voice even. Broccoli again? Don't you know anything else? He scoffed, pushing the plate away. I bit back a sharper reply, knowing it wouldn't help. I'll make something else if you're not happy with it. That'd be a first, he muttered. The retort stung, fueling a silent anger inside me. I turned back to the kitchen, feeling his gaze on my every move. Where are you going? He barked. I said I'd make you something else, didn't I? My voice carried a hint of defiance I didn't know I had left. James stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Sit down. Let's not pretend like you've got other things to do. Your world revolves around me, remember? His words were a leash, pulling me back. Yeah, I remember. I heard him sit back down. No, sorry, no, thank you. Just a heavy silence that settled over us like dust. As the night dragged on, so did his critique. This house is a mess, he announced, seemingly out of nowhere. I followed his gaze. The books on the coffee table weren't perfectly aligned, a pillow was slightly askew, life happened in our house. But not the life he wanted. Clean it up. I wanted to scream. To tell him a house lived in would never meet his pristine standards. Instead, I fixed the pillow, straightened the books, and swallowed the lump in my throat. The place could use some work, I muttered under my breath. What was that? His voice had a sharp edge. Nothing, I said quickly, louder now. Just talking to myself. He eyed me with suspicion, but said nothing more. In bed, I lay awake, staring at the darkness. The chasm between us was filled with unspoken thoughts and stifled dreams. I thought of all the words I wanted to say, the accusations, the hurt, anger, and all the wishes for a life that felt like it was slowly slipping away from my grasp. I was tethered, bound by invisible chains of dependency and fear. Perfect, they said. But perfect was just a word, and words were the cheapest currency in the economy of our sham of a marriage. So there I was, just a regular day heading back from the store, arms loaded with groceries. Never did it cross my mind that a bit of ice on the sidewalk would land me square on my rear, but life's got a twisted sense of humor, doesn't it? Down I went with a nasty slip, and the pain shot right through my leg like nothing I've felt before. I tried to get up, but no dice. My leg was having none of it, throbbing like mad. That's when a couple of folks came rushing over. "You all right?" they asked. Must have seen the whole clumsy show. Trying to keep my cool, I just nodded. "I think I busted my leg." They didn't think twice and hailed down a cab to whisk me to the hospital. At the ER, it was a circus. Nurses took their sweet time before a doc finally got to me. He had just one look at my leg and his face said it all before his mouth did. "It's broken," he told me, matter of fact like he was talking about the weather. I grimaced, not at the news, but at the thought of facing James with this. While waiting for the docs to do their thing, I figured I should let my husband know, but the dude didn't pick up his phone. Sent him a text, "Broke my leg, at the hospital," short and sweet, but not even a peep back from him. Turns out, I was stuck there till morning, and the hospital was no hotel, that's for sure. All I got was cold coffee and a nurse who seemed like she'd rather be anywhere else. As soon as I could hobble, they shoved some papers at me to sign and sent me packing in a cab. Back home, the cast was as white as the snow outside and twice as annoying. James was waiting, his face like a thundercloud ready to burst. "No, how you doing?" or "What happened?" He just goes, "Where's dinner?" Really? I'm standing there on crutches, leg in a cast, and he's all mad about dinner? I snapped back. "What do you think? I went dancing. Look at my leg." But he's on a roll, acting like I did it on purpose. "You always have excuses," he sneered. "Can't even do the one thing you're supposed to." Can you believe that? After a night in the ER, all he cared about was his stupid dinner. The whole thing was too much. There I was, hurt and shaking, and he couldn't care less. The air was as cold as that patch of ice I'd slipped on, and I knew right then, this was more than just a broken leg. It was like the ice under us had cracked wide open. I hauled myself toward the kitchen table, crutch by crutch, as if every step was a mile. I was cooking dinner for my beloved husband, it's funny. The bin was near overflowing, and I'd missed it. It was a tiny slip-up, but with James, nothing was ever tiny. "What's this now?" James barked, catching the sight of the unemptied bin. "You're home all day, and you can't even manage the simplest tasks." He stormed over, all bluster and rage, and with one swift motion, toppled the bin, its contents sprawling like a small-scale disaster at my feet. "Clean it up," he thundered. My fingers shook as I reached down, but not from the physical pain of my injury. It was something deeper, a crack in something that had once been whole. That night was sleepless, the echoes of his voice blending with the hot sting of tears. Morning came with no comfort, just the light revealing the mess of last night. I sat at the kitchen table, papers in front of me, the sound of coffee dripping in the background. James stumbled in, the stink of beer still on him from last night. "Morning," he growled, his voice like gravel. "What's for breakfast?" I pushed the papers toward him. "I've got your breakfast right here." He squinted down at the divorce papers, unreadable for a moment. Then he looked up, a sly, mocking smile spreading across his face. "You serious?" "As a heart attack," I said. Though inside, my heart was racing, like it could bust out of my chest. He threw his head back and laughed, rough and loud. "You ain't got the guts." I clenched my jaw. My voice came out low and steadfast. "Already did it. Just need your sign off." He leaned down, face inches from mine. You think you can survive without me? You're a broken bird, can't even take out the trash. I'm done talking, James, I said, meeting his stare. Sign the papers, or I'll have the law make you sign. He scoffed, grabbed the pen with a squeezed grip, and scrawled his name, each stroke heavy and deliberate. He threw the pen down like it was on fire. Good luck, darling, he sneered. You'll be crawling back before the month's up. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. This was my line in the sand, the overflowing bin that couldn't take more trash, more lies. Despite everything, I smiled, because that paper felt like the first step on crutches toward a different life. Crawling's not my style, I said quietly. When I opened my eyes the next morning, everything was too quiet. Too calm. It was weird waking up to silence when inside, I felt like everything was about to blow. That's when he told me. Over a cup of coffee, he said we had to get the property split locked down. And, oh boy, he already had a lawyer in mind. Some hotshot in the city, near Lauren Tech. You coming with me, he said, not asking. We'll get this done today. I really didn't have much of a say with my leg all broken and useless, so I just nodded. He helped me into the car, propped up my cast, and off we went. Everything was fine, normal even, until it wasn't. We were zipping down the highway, the city in the distance, like a bunch of toy buildings. Then he pulled over, sudden-like. Said the wheel needed air. I'll check it out, he mumbled. The next thing I know, he told me to get out of the car. Just want to make sure we are safe. His tone was off, and not in a good way. But I got out, leaning on the car for support and feeling every bit as fragile as my plastered leg. He fiddled around by the tires for a minute, and then, without any kind of warning, hopped back in and hit the gas. I mean, he took off so fast I barely had time to shout. So there I was, out in the middle of nowhere with nothing but the sound of his car disappearing down the highway. I couldn't believe it. Was this really happening? I didn't have to think twice. My phone was in my hand, and I was hitting record. When he picked up, he was all smug. I've never hated the sound of a voice more. Come back, I yelled. This isn't funny. But he just laughed. Actually laughed. Said something about me getting what I deserved for wanting a divorce. Can you believe that? The line went dead, and the weight of what just happened slammed into me like a brick wall. I stood there on the side of the road, watching the taillights of his car disappear into a blurred speck in the distance. I was alone, miles from anything that resembled civilization. The chill in my bones went deeper than the winter's touch. It was the harsh truth gnawing at me. I was truly on my own. Cars whizzed by, each one felt like a sting. None of them stopped. Why would they? It's not their drama, not their craziness to deal with. I was just some woman on crutches on the side of the road to them. The chill was setting in, biting through my jacket as the minutes dragged on. There wasn't a soul in sight until a gorgeous Jeep truck rattled to a halt beside me. Behind the wheel was the one I least expected to see here. My former boss, Joe. As the car's heater blasted warm air, I could feel my cheeks and hands start to regain some feeling. Joe glanced over at me, his brow heavy with concern. You look like crap, Kate, you know that? He said, gruff, but kindly. Why the hell didn't you call someone? I shrugged, feeling the weight of the situation press down on me. Thought I could handle it, I muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. He left you on the side of the road with a broken leg? His voice rose, incredulous and angry. That James is a damn coward. I nodded, hugging myself tighter as I remembered the icy wind and the pain. Yeah, I guess he is. We reached Lauren Tech, and Joe practically carried me up to the 5th floor. The familiar sounds of the workplace surrounded me, a jarring yet comforting reminder of a life I once knew. Inside his office, Joe handed me a mug of coffee, which I clutched gratefully between my hands. The aroma was a heady promise of warmth. Thanks, Joe, I said after taking a tentative sip. The coffee was strong, just the way I liked it, a sharp contrast to the bitter cold I had endured. He grunted, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. Can't believe that bastard. After everything. Let's not talk about him, I interjected, keen to avoid going down that road. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. It was a comfortable silence, born from years of working together and understanding the ebb and flow of each other's moods. Joe finally stopped pacing and turned to face me. What are you going to do now, Kate? His tone was serious, the playful edge gone. I don't know, I admitted, feeling lost. I really don't know. His gaze softened, and he took the seat across from me. Look, I'm not gonna beat around the bush. We could use you back here. The team hasn't been the same since you left. A spark of something, hope, maybe, or just surprise, fluttered in my chest. You serious? As a heart attack, he said dryly. You were one of the best. Hell, you are the best. I should have fought harder to keep you. I smiled weakly, both warmed and overwhelmed by his offer. Wouldn't be easy with my leg like this. We'll manage. I'll wait until you're back on your feet, literally. He leaned forward, a determined glint in his eyes. I'm not taking no for an answer. The toughness of his words, the undeniable command in his voice, it felt reassuring. Against the backdrop of uncertainty and pain, his offer was a beacon. I'll think about it, I said, knowing full well I'd already made up my mind. I'll think about it, I repeated, allowing a smile to play on my lips. Joe grunted in response, a sound that conveyed understanding and a touch of impatience. Having a purpose, a place to be, and the support of someone who believed in me was more than I could have hoped for given the day's events. It was an unexpected turn, but maybe, just maybe, it was the kind I needed. The air was thick with tension when James headed for the boss's door. The clump of his boots was more hesitant today, like he sensed the storm brewing. He pushed the door, and it creaked open, announcing his arrival to what was once his throne room. There I was, leaning against the desk, arms folded, waiting. James, come in, shut the door behind you, the boss said, his voice an even, ironed-out calm. James saw me and turned pale, but quickly pulled himself together. What's this about? He grumbled like a cornered animal, ready to bite. The boss gestured to the chair, but James didn't sit. Instead, he crossed his arms, a mirror image of my stance, but filled with defiance where mine held determination. James, the boss started, fixing him with a look that could freeze hell over. I always thought of you as a sharp man. But what you've done? That's the sharpest kind of stupid. James shot a glance at me, a mix of fear and anger in his eyes. So, she's been yapping, has she? What lies has she been selling? No lies needed, mate, I said, my voice steady as a heartbeat. Just played him the greatest hits of your ugly symphony. You've been recorded, clear as day. The boss reached into his desk, pulled out a recording device, and slid it across the table. Care to listen for nostalgia? James's face turned the color of concrete. You can't do this. You can't fire me over. Over what, James? Over you terrorizing your wife, my employee? Oh, I can. And I am. The boss cut in, his voice cold steel. James's eyes darted between the two of us, looking for some crack in the armor, some slip of weakness. But there wasn't one. I'll take you to court, he spat out. That's funny, I said with a cold laugh, 'cause that's exactly where we're going. Only difference is, I've got a bed of evidence, and you've got nothing but lies and empty threats. The boss stood up, the chair screeching against the floor like a war cry. Get out of my office, and get out of our lives. You're finished here. And with that, James's fate was sealed. In the courtroom, the evidence weighed heavier than his words, heavier than his anger. The judge didn't hesitate, hitting the gavel like a nail in the coffin of our married life. Sentence you to pay the compensation, and this court grants the separation, the judge announced, and it was like the first breath of spring air, chilly but promising blooms. Back at the job, I slid into the familiar groove of my work, but with a new shine on it. I wasn't just doing tasks, I was rebuilding. Every keystroke was a brick, every good morning mortar, every completed project a pillar in the house of my new life. "Kate," my colleague Mark said, breaking my concentration. "Must feel weird, huh? Getting everything back?" I swiveled in my chair, facing him. "Weird doesn't start to cover it, Mark. Feels like I've come back from the dead." Mark chuckled, his laughter rumbling like an old pickup truck. "Zombie Kate, back for revenge." I cracked a smile. "Something like that. Only this time I'm not taking any crap from anyone. No more Mrs. Nice Gal." "That's the spirit. You know, we all got your back here, no matter what." I nodded. The warmth in the office was more than the heating. It was the camaraderie, a shared fortress against any storm that might come. Life was as predictable as a routine dental checkup until today. "My name's Jenny, your average tooth fairy who trades in molars for money, except that I work with state-of-the-art equipment in a swanky downtown clinic. My husband, Mark, is pretty much the academic type, graying at the temples and all. He lectured in the halls I once roamed as a student, though we never swapped anything more than a hello back then. It was only after my cap and gown were tucked away that we started sharing dinners, and before you knew it, vows. You could say we lived a standard married with no kids, just a couple of lazy goldfish life. Until today. Exhausted, slipping out of my work shoes, I saw them, divorce papers, as stark and chilling as an extracted wisdom tooth, lying beside a note on a coffee table that had seen better days, his handwriting, no doubt. Grimacing, I picked up the note, his words punched me in the gut harder than any root canal ever would. "Jenny, I'm tired. Tired of the humdrum, of papers, of people. I need silence, not the kind we got on Sunday mornings, but the deep kind that you only find away from civilization. Consider this my path to becoming a nobody, to finding some darn peace. Mark." My hands trembled, the note nearly crumpling in my grip. No dramatic outburst, shock does that to you. I uncapped one of the pens that was always scattered around and scribbled on the back of some grocery receipt, the only paper in immediate reach, then dialed Mark, heart drumming a harsh beat against my ribs. The line clicked, and after what seemed like a year, his familiar, now distant voice answered. "Jenny? Mark. What's this about becoming a nobody, huh? You dumping our years together like last week's trash? Jenny, you're not getting it. I can't. I don't want to. It's not you, it's..." "Cut the crap, Mark. You leave a note? Papers? Just like that?" My voice rose as I gripped the phone like it was a lifeline. "Where are you?" There was a pause, a silence that spoke volumes. "Somewhere you can't find me. Somewhere I can be alone." "Alone? And what am I supposed to do, huh? Just sit tight and smile while you play hermit?" "Jenny, please." "No, you listen. You can't just decide you're bored and..." "Bored isn't the word, Jenny. I need something else, something different." "What? Silence? You want silence, by earplugs. But you don't just get to check out." I spat the words out as if they were sour. "Jenny, please try to understand. Oh, I understand, all right. Understood loud and clear, Professor. You've made your point. Enjoy your bloody peace then." The line went dead with a finality that echoed in the now too quiet room. The note lay there, staring up at me with its life-altering news, and I was left to figure out if I was to press on with the painful extraction of Mark from my life or root around in the mess for a sliver of hope. It seemed I had more than just teeth to pull. The clinic reeked of strong antiseptic. Where it used to put me at ease, now, it just stirred the pot of my mind, brimming with gossip. Mark, my ex, gone puff, just like that. And the fact that everyone wouldn't shut up about it was getting under my skin. The phone was buzzing again. It never eased up. I knew without looking it was more of the same nosy folks prying for details. Sam's Dental, how may I help you? I answered, using the clinic's name to avoid personal questions. Hey, it's Lizzie from math department. We heard about Mark. You holding up okay? I sighed. Yeah, Lizzie, I'm doing my job. Anything else? I mean, it's just weird, right? Mark's such an urban guy. She pried, digging for dirt. It's his choice, I snapped, a bit more sharply than intended. Sorry, it's just been a rough day. I could almost hear her shrug through the phone. Sure, just checking in. You know how it is here, we're all a bit nosy. The clinic was quieter than usual. I could almost hear the whispers bleeding through the walls. Patients eyed me with a mix of pity and morbid curiosity as I walked through the hall. I needed a break from the staring and the rumors. I found myself in the staff room with Rosa, the receptionist, who was always blunt as a spoon. She was digging through her locker, the metal door screeching like nails on a chalkboard. So, he left you the papers then disappeared, huh? Rosa didn't mince her words. That's about the size of it, I muttered, pouring myself a coffee. She leaned against the lockers, arching an eyebrow. You sign M? Yeah. Savage. Rosa shook her head. Man's got style, give him that. I couldn't help but laugh, leave it to Rosa to call a disappearing act stylish. Back in my office, the nice and tidy one with diplomas on the wall, the phone rang again. It was the one face I didn't mind showing up in my caller ID, Angela, the closest thing I'd had to a sister since forever. Girl, how you just gonna let him punk you like that? No hello, no how are you, just Angela in all her glory. He didn't punk me, Ange. I signed the papers, that was my choice. And you just gonna roll over and play dead? There's nothing to fight for. I'm done and dusted with him. There was a pause. I knew Angela's wheels were turning. Fine, she said. But this isn't gonna fly. We're going out tonight. You need to blow off some steam, or you'll go nuts. I wanted to argue, but she wasn't wrong. Besides, it beat listening to the whispers and rumors that looped like a bad soundtrack in my mind. The hours ticked by, filled with teeth cleaning and dodging personal questions. By the time my last patient left, I was ready to peel out of there like a bat out of hell. Angela was waiting for me at the local dive, the kind of place where the beer was cold, and no one gave two hoots about your personal drama. I walked in and spotted her straight away, waving enthusiastically. What's kicking, chicken? She greeted me, sliding over a glass of something strong. Hey, Ange. Just the usual circus. I gulped down the drink, welcoming the burn. We talked, or rather, she talked, and I tried to forget. It worked, mostly. The clink of glasses and Angela's hearty laughter were a good combo. It was late when we said our goodbyes, just outside the bar. The night was dark, the wind was cold, and once inside my car, I realized something. I felt lighter. Like dropping off a heavy suitcase I'd been lugging around. The years had rolled by like series of silent movie frames. That old bitterness about Mark, it was more or less a faint echo these days. I mean, life had to move on, right? I shifted gears somewhere along the line, and now, well, now things were steady. You could say I was living the quiet life, except for the occasional siren wail, thanks to my new husband, Tom, the cop. Tom was good people. A chuckle in a uniform, you might say. He had this knack, you know, for turning a crappy day around with just a smirk and a joke that was so bad it circled back to being good. Then there was Joey, our little typhoon in toddler form. 3 years old and already the boss of the household. If joy came in human form, it was him, no contest. One pretty normal Tuesday, I was in the kitchen, fighting with the wrapper of a macaroni box. That's when Tom ambled in, his uniform looking like it had seen better days. He planted a kiss on my cheek, still sparking a little zing even after all these years, and ruffled Joey's hair. Hey, "Bud, how was your day with Mom?" he asked Joey, who was smashing a toy truck into the linoleum. Joey's answer was a happy shriek and more enthusiastic truck smashing. "I'm starting to think he's going to follow in your footsteps," I said, finally getting the box open and emptying it into the simmering water. Tom's beeper suddenly blared, ruining the moment. He checked it and grimaced. "Looks like the station needs me. Some brawl at the bar downtown." "Geez, Tom. Stay safe, will you?" "Always," he said, standing up but with Joey still clinging to him. He handed our son back to me. "Gotta run. I'll try not to wake you too when I come back." After he left, it was just Joey and me and the hum of the refrigerator. Joey babbled something about Dada, and I couldn't help but feel a twang in my chest. Sure, I had Tom and Joey, a solid job, a roof over my head. But sometimes, when Tom's cruiser pulled out of the driveway, or when Joey's laughter filled a room, I'd remember I once had a different life, a different partner in the dance. "Come on, champ," I told Joey. "Let's tackle that mountain of blocks like we're the king and queen of the castle." And as I built flimsy towers for Joey to knock over, laughing all the while, I realized I'd turned over more than just a new leaf. I'd started a whole new chapter. And you know what? It looked pretty damn good from where I was sitting. As the flat screen on the wall spat out images with quiet contempt, there was Mark, my ex, hunched over on a patch of green. The grass was probably crumpled under him, matching his wrinkled linen shirt. I hadn't seen him in years, not since he traded our life for silence and dirt paths. Those journalists were eyeing him like he was a prize pig at the fair, each waiting for their turn. Mark fiddled with strands of his wild beard as he leaned into the microphone. His voice, still with that calm know-it-all tone, itched in my ears. "Yeah, that's right," he was saying. "I had to leave because of her. She's got this heart, steeled over, you know? Cold. And cheating? She was a regular at that game. Took my piece, she did. That's why you find me here, away from all that mess." The air in the dental clinic was colder than usual, or maybe it was just my mood darkening everything around me since that darned news report aired. I slammed my locker shut, trying to shove away the clutter of whispers and side glances that had infested the office like bad breath. It wasn't just the sterile smell of mint and disinfectant lingering, it was the stench of gossip. Thanks to my ex, Mark, I was the new plaque everyone wanted to scrape off. "Hey, you done early?" Gina, one of the hygienists, leaned against the door frame, balancing a stack of patient folders. Her tone was casual, but her eyes were skirting around mine, wary. Too wary. "Yeah," I grunted, collecting my stuff. "Need to clear my head. This place is looking kinda stuffy." She snorted, a crude sound that was music to my irritated ears. "Looks the same to me. Though, you could cut the tension with dental floss." I offered a half smile, but didn't meet her eyes. "Maybe some people got cavities in their personalities," I replied, voice tight. As I walked out, I couldn't shake off the prying eyes. Reaching my car, I spotted Tom waiting for me, arms crossed, leant on the hood. His usual sunny exterior was clouded over. "How's it going, Jenny?" he asked as I approached, trying to light up the dimming day. "Like a root canal gone wrong," I replied, my keys jingled with a shake of my hand. Tom pushed himself off the car. "You know what I think? Screw him. He's talking crap." "That's one word for it," I said, opening the car door. Tom detoured it, his stance stubborn. "We shouldn't let this nonsense get between us. You've got me, Joey, and Angela. It's their problem if they believe that liar." The sincerity in his voice was a soothing balm, but I was too riled up to take it in fully. "Sure, but try telling that to the hyena club in there." He grabbed my hand, his grip firm. "Listen, let's grab Joey, hit the pizza place, and just chill. All right?" I took a breath, absorbing the offer. "You always know how to patch things up, cop hubby," I said with a tired smile. "And don't forget it." He flashed a grin, the kind that could make a dentist proud. But before we could continue, a call cut through our bubble. "Mommy!" Joey came sprinting across the parking lot, his babysitter trailing behind. The little guy wrapped around my legs, a toddler tornado. "Hey champ," I said, lifting him up. "You ready for some pizza?" "Pizza, pizza," Joey chanted, any worry about the day's drama lost in his innocent cheer. I glanced back at the clinic once Joey and Tom were settled in the car, a cold laugh escaping me. To hell with them. Let's go have some real family time. Tom revved the engine, a mischievous spark lighting his eyes. "No looking back, babe, that's the rule." "Got it, boss," I said, and as we drove off, Joey's giggles, the only sound I cared about, I felt the heaviness shed bit by bit. It was just another crappy chapter in the novel of life, one that I'd darn well write myself. No ex-husband was going to taint my reflection, not anymore. I was still reeling from another day's work when she cornered me. Jasmine, the new intern, was kind of edgy since the day she stumbled in, but today, she was all jittery. So there I was, peeling off my gloves, and she comes up real close, smelling like antiseptic and fear. "Doc, I gotta talk to you," Jasmine said, her voice as shaky as a beaten-up washing machine. "What's up?" I was already thinking about the pile of paperwork waiting to claw at my evening. "It's about Mark. I heard the other nurses saying you were married to that guy." Her eyes darted around the room as if afraid the walls would grow ears. "Yeah, what about him?" I tossed the gloves and reached for my coffee, gone cold hours ago. "I was a student when he was teaching. He wasn't just giving lectures, if you know what I mean." Her voice took a dive, like someone had yanked the volume down. "He did stuff. Bad stuff." I felt something raw and bitter twist in my gut. "Stuff?" I asked, hoping for some vague rumor I could dismiss. He was handsy, you know, with me. And with others. We were just a bunch of scared kids, and he liked that power." Jasmine spat the words out like they were poison. My grip on the mug tightened. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I saw him on TV, acting all holy and repentant. I couldn't stomach it. I threatened to expose him, and then he vanished." "That coward," I hissed. The mug in my hand cracked, coffee seeping through the spiderweb crevices to drip onto the floor. "He told everyone he left 'cause of you and some grand spiritual quest. But that's bull. He fled 'cause I had proof of what he did. The texts, the creepy late-night calls." "That's a big claim, Jasmine," I managed to say, my throat dry as sawdust. "You got any of that proof on you?" "Yep," she said, a grim satisfaction in her tone. She hauled out her phone, a cheap thing with a cracked screen, and flicked through messages until she shoved it under my nose. There it was, in black and white. A whole sordid history laid out in texts and emails. I read, every word a punch in the gut. When I was done, I looked up. "I'm sorry, for what it's worth. Thank you for coming forward." "We gonna do something about it?" she asked, tough as nails now. "Absolutely," I said, feeling a flame of anger kindling inside me. And as we plotted revenge on the man I once called a husband, the man who had fooled us all, I felt a grim kind of satisfaction. This was going to be messy, but hell, it was about time some dirt got cleaned up around here. I stood there in the clearing, staring at the man I once called my husband. There he was, Professor Mark, looking every bit the wilderness prophet with a graying beard and a flock of adoring followers. His eyes flashed over me, a brief flash of recognition before his face settled into that infuriating calm. "Jenny? What the hell are you doing here?" His voice had that familiar sharp edge. "Just wanted a chat, Mark. A cozy catch-up between exes. Never thought I'd find you playing guru," I said, squinting at the half-naked followers prancing around. He crossed his arms, a smirk playing on his lips. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" I cut to the chase. "That trash talk on TV, really, Mark? Cruel and unfaithful. You sure have a way with fiction." He shrugged, the same old nonchalant shrug that drove me up the wall. Needed a story, didn't I? Playing the victim pays the bills. I couldn't help but laugh, bitter and sharp. And here I thought you ran off to find inner peace. His audience looked on, starving for some drama. He was unfazed. Gotta give the people what they want. Yeah, but at my expense? I felt that familiar anger bubbling. And there's another thing, about Jasmine. His face lost color for a second, but then he barked out a laugh. Jasmine? That kid had nothing on me. His nerve was something else. Without breaking eye contact, I slid out my phone. Actually, she did. He squinted at the screen as I flicked through the messages Jasmine had sent me. Threats, creepy come-ons, the whole 9 yards. Mark tried to grab the phone out of my hands, but then Tom appeared next to me. The message of protection couldn't have been clearer if he was wearing a flashing sign. It made me feel safe and furious all at once that I needed it. Look, everyone, Mark's voice broke through the silence, all smooth and soothing like one of those late-night radio hosts. This is all a big misunderstanding, all right? My ex here, she's got it in for me, that's all this is. I could feel my jaw clench at his words, but I kept my cool. I wasn't about to let him get to me. Not this time. Tom's voice, gravel mixed with thunder, growled next to me. Cut the crap, Mark. We all know what you did. And it's all coming out today. Mark's followers looked from him to me and back again, like they were watching a tennis match. Just then, the wail of the sirens cut through Mark's phony serenity like a chainsaw through butter. His face drained of color, which on him, looked almost impressive. Please, Mark was kneeling now, the guru luster gone, replaced by sweaty desperation. You can't do this. Think of my reputation. Tom snorted, stepping closer to Mark so that the kneeling man had to crane his neck just to keep eye contact. Reputation? What about the lies about Jenny? What about all those messages, huh? What about Jasmine's story, you think that doesn't count for nothing? The game's up, buddy. Mark looked up at us, his eyes flicking from my snarl to Tom's stony glare, and then to the uniformed officers coming up behind us. There was a moment, a single moment, where he looked like he might run. But Mark didn't run. He just sat there on his knees, looking up. Looking like he knew that the tides had indeed turned. The followers were mumbling among themselves now, backing away from their fallen idol, their murmurs building like waves before a storm. Then, one of the cops stepped forward, flipping open a notebook. Are you Professor Mark Thompson? He asked, his tone neutral. Mark just nodded, his voice squeaking like a rusty hinge. Yes, sir. The officer glanced at me, then at Tom. We're going to need to take him in, he said, as if asking for permission. Tom just gave a short nod, and I felt my heart kick up a notch. This was it. Mark shot one last desperate look at his disciples. I'm being set up, he yelled, hoping for sympathy, salvation. But seeing the truth staring back at him from the scattered glances of the crowd was the nail in the coffin of any sympathy he hoped for. The cop cuffed him with all the flair of someone clocking in for a routine shift. Mark Thompson, you are under arrest. The clink of the cuffs was like the sweetest music, and that's when I knew, for sure. The tides hadn't just turned, they'd flipped, completely. Tom wrapped his arm around me as we watched Mark being led away. The scene felt almost surreal. I turned to Tom, and his nod told me everything. We were on the same team, and we were strong. I was standing outside and breathing in the fresh air. The phone in my pocket started its own dance, buzzing with incoming calls, no doubt apologies and awkward backtracking. I had no interest in their sorry words, I told you so wasn't my style. The door to the clinic swung open, and Jasmine walked out. Hey, Doc, she said, with a grin that seemed out of place, but right for someone who'd just shrugged off a weight they'd been dragging around. Is it true? They got him? Yep, I said, feeling a sharp sense of satisfaction at her smile. It's true. Good. It's about damn time, she said, her voice firm. I could hear some of my own resolve echoed in her tone. Jasmine had courage, coming forward, speaking out. It's not easy, facing ghosts. He won't be seeing the outside of a jail cell for a long while, Tom said. Good riddance, she shot back, no hint of sympathy for my ex-husband. I couldn't help smiling at her spunk. You did good, I said. Really good. Tom's radio crackled with police chatter, but he ignored it, his attention on today's victory. You gonna celebrate? Jasmine asked. Her shift was obviously over, and she was all but bouncing on her heels, ready to let relief transition into something warmer, more joyful. Mom's got Joey, I answered. So, yeah, we'll celebrate. Quietly. Jasmine nodded, then left, her steps light. Let's go home, Tom, I said after a moment. Let's go be with our son. Nothing I'd rather do. He agreed, and we turned away, my hand finding his, strength in our combined grip, ready to face whatever came next, together. The quaint little gift shop was a hive of activity, its narrow aisles teeming with last-minute shoppers. The air was thick with the scent of scented candles and fresh stationery. I was there too, meandering through the shelves, my eyes skimming over quirky mugs and vintage clocks, searching for a unique keepsake. That's when I noticed him, a lone figure amidst the chaos, looking utterly perplexed and out of his element. He was standing in front of the greeting cards, flipping a card open and then snapping it shut, his brows knitted in concentration. A small, peculiar trinket dangled from his other hand. He seemed to be debating with himself, lost in a world of indecision. I couldn't resist. I took a few steps towards him and said, "Can't make up your mind?" He looked up, slightly startled by the intrusion. His eyes, a deep shade of brown, met mine, and for a moment, he seemed to forget his predicament. "Oh, hi. Yeah, I'm in a bit of a bind here." "I'm James," he said, offering a hand. "I'm Anna," I replied, shaking his hand. It was a firm handshake, confident yet inviting. "Nice to meet you, Anna. I'm on a mission to find the perfect birthday gift for my mom, but I seem to be circling around these two," he confessed, holding up the card and the trinket for me to see. The card was bright and colorful, with a humorous quip on the front. The trinket, on the other hand, was a small, intricately designed figurine, delicate and refined. I chuckled. Well, they're quite different. What's your mom like? Maybe I can help you choose. James's face lit up with a grateful smile. That would be amazing, thank you. My mom, she's incredible. She's got this sharp wit but also appreciates the finer things. She's been my rock, you know? As he spoke about his mother, his respect and love for her were palpable. It was touching to see a son speak so fondly of his mother. Well, it sounds like she's a woman of depth. How about we find something that celebrates both her sharp wit and her elegant taste? I suggested. We spent the next few minutes discussing his mother's likes and dislikes, her hobbies, and her style. The more we talked, the more I realized how easy and natural it felt to converse with James. He had a way of making every topic interesting and every joke funnier. Eventually, we settled on a beautiful pendant that was both elegant and quirky. It was a small, silver piece with an intricate design, but the centerpiece was a tiny, whimsical figure that seemed to dance in the light. Anna, you're a lifesaver. I would have been lost in here for hours without your help. How can I thank you? James said, his relief evident. How about you save me from having to cook dinner tonight? I joked, half hoping he'd take the bait. James's eyes twinkled with amusement. Dinner it is. There's this cozy little Italian place I know. How does that sound? It sounds perfect, I replied, my heart skipping a beat. We exchanged numbers and made plans to meet up for dinner. As I left the shop, the pendant securely in James's bag, I couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement. In a sea of mundane days, this chance encounter felt like a breath of fresh air. The evening air was crisp, the kind that hinted at the end of summer and the start of something new. I stood outside James's parents' house, my palms sweaty, rehearsing my greeting. "Nice to meet you." I practiced under my breath, trying to sound confident, not realizing that no amount of rehearsal could prepare me for the Carters. James opened the door with that familiar, warm smile. "Ready?" he asked, sensing my nervousness. "As I'll ever be," I replied, trying to muster a smile. We stepped into the living room, and that's when I saw her, Mrs. Carter. She sat regally in her armchair, her cane resting against her leg, her eyes scrutinizing me like a hawk. Mr. Carter sat beside her, a silent, almost invisible presence. "Mom, Dad, this is Anna," James introduced. "Nice to meet you," I said, extending my hand. Mrs. Carter looked at my hand and then at me, her gaze piercing. "Sit, dear," she said, her voice firm, ignoring my hand. We sat, and an uncomfortable silence filled the room. I could feel Mrs. Carter's eyes on me, examining, judging. James seemed oblivious to the tension, or maybe he was just used to it. "So, Anna," Mrs. Carter began, her tone casual yet loaded. "James tells us you're an accountant. That must be interesting." "Yes, it's quite rewarding. I love working with numbers, finding solutions," I replied, trying to sound upbeat. She hummed, unimpressed. "And your parents, what do they do?" I explained, but with each answer, her questions grew more personal, more probing. It felt less like a conversation and more like an interrogation. James remained silent, his occasional attempts to change the subject quickly overridden by his mother's pointed questions. "Tell me, Anna, how much do you earn?" Mrs. Carter asked, her tone casual but her intent clear. I was taken aback. It wasn't a question you'd expect in a first meeting, and certainly not in such a straightforward manner. I glanced at James, hoping for some support, but he avoided my gaze. "It's a decent amount. It allows me to live comfortably," I answered vaguely, feeling my cheeks flush. "I see. And this house of yours, you live there alone?" she continued, her curiosity unabashed. "It was my grandmother's. I inherited it," I replied, feeling more like I was in a job interview than meeting my boyfriend's parents. Mrs. Carter nodded, her expression unreadable. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of discomfort. Mr. Carter remained silent, his presence almost ghost-like, while Mrs. Carter's questions lingered in the air, sharp and unnerving. As we left, James seemed pleased. "That went well, don't you think?" he said, oblivious to the undercurrents. "Sure," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. As we drove away, the weight of the evening settled on my shoulders. Mrs. Carter's intense scrutiny and pointed questions lingered in my mind, a stark contrast to the warmth and ease I felt with James. James and I, we were in love, sure, but marriage wasn't on my immediate bingo card. Yet, there we were, standing in my living room, the same one I grew up in, talking about forever. "Anna, I know it's soon, but I feel it, you know?" "Why wait?" James said, his eyes full of that earnestness that first drew me to him. I hesitated, the image of Mrs. Carter's scrutinizing gaze flashing in my mind. "James, your mom, that dinner was intense. Are you sure we're ready for this step?" He took my hands in his, a comforting warmth spreading through me. "Anna, I love you. And yeah, my mom can be a bit much, but don't worry, we'll handle it together. You and me, okay?" His words were a balm, soothing away the doubts. "Okay," I whispered, the word a leap of faith. We decided on a simple ceremony. No grand gestures, no elaborate fanfare, just an intimate gathering of close friends and family. It felt right, true to who we were. But as the day approached, the butterflies in my stomach weren't just from bridal jitters. The wedding was beautiful, a small affair in my backyard. The same trees that witnessed my childhood games now stood witness to my vows. But amidst the joy, there was an undercurrent of tension, an unspoken question hanging in the air: how would the Carters fit into this new picture we were painting? James sensed it, I could tell. As we danced, his hand on my waist, mine on his shoulder, he leaned in. "Don't worry, love. We'll make it work. You, me, and yes, even my parents." I smiled, a mix of hope and apprehension. "Promise?" "Promise," he affirmed, sealing it with a kiss. But promises, I'd learn, are fragile things. The reality hit home when James and I moved into my grandmother's house. It was a quaint place, its walls holding memories of a lifetime. The ramps and low steps, once installed for my grandmother's convenience, now stood as silent testaments to her struggles and strength. "Your grandma had it all figured out, huh?" James remarked one evening, his gaze trailing over the seamless design. "Yeah, she did. She wanted to be independent, no matter what," I said, a hint of pride in my voice. It wasn't long before Mrs. Carter came to visit. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, took in every detail of the house. The way she moved, slowly, deliberately, her cane tapping against the floor, it was like she was marking her territory. "This is a nice place, Anna. Very accommodating," she commented, her voice laced with something I couldn't quite place. I forced a smile. "Thanks, Mrs. Carter. We like it." But her next words sent a chill down my spine. "It's difficult, you know, living in a place that doesn't understand your needs. I think I'd be better off here." The statement hung in the air, a silent ultimatum. James, ever the peacemaker, tried to navigate the treacherous waters. "Mom, we can discuss this later. Let's not jump into decisions." But the decision, it seemed, was already made. In her mind, Mrs. Carter had found her new abode. And as I looked into James's eyes, searching for the reassurance I so desperately needed, I realized that our swift marriage was about to face its first real test. The day the Carters moved in, the house changed. It wasn't just the extra shoes by the door or the additional toothbrushes in the bathroom. It was like the air itself shifted, dense with the weight of their presence. I was in the kitchen, trying to make sense of the chaos that had become my pantry, when Mrs. Carter hobbled in. Her cane clicked against the floor, a sound that was quickly becoming the soundtrack of my life. "Anna, dear, I was thinking," she started, her voice cutting through the silence. "This shelf is too high. I can't reach anything. You should rearrange it." I bit my lip, holding back a sigh. "Sure, Mrs. Carter. I'll take care of it. And another thing," she continued, oblivious to my growing frustration, "Mark and I should take the bedroom downstairs. It's just too much for me to climb up and down." "But that's our bedroom," I protested weakly, the reality of the situation sinking in. She gave me a look, one that said my comfort was secondary. "Well, it's just practical, dear. You're young, you can manage." Before I could respond, Mr. Carter entered, his presence like a shadow, always there, but never quite tangible. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his voice neutral. "Just discussing some adjustments," Mrs. Carter replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. As they left, I felt a surge of resentment. My home, my sanctuary, was being dismantled, piece by piece, and I was expected to smile and nod. The days that followed were a blur of demands and critiques. Mrs. Carter had an opinion on everything: how the furniture should be arranged, what meals should be cooked, how the house should be cleaned. And every evening, James would come home to a battlefield, his attempts to mediate often ending in heated arguments. "Anna, we need to be understanding. They're adjusting," he'd say, trying to calm the storm. "Adjusting? James, they're not adjusting, they're invading. This is our home, not a hotel for your parents," I'd retort, my patience wearing thin. But the breaking point came one evening, over dinner. Mrs. Carter had made some offhand comment about the meal, how it wasn't to her liking. Something inside me snapped. Mrs. Carter, I understand you're used to things a certain way, but this is my home too. I'm doing my best here, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. She looked at me, her eyes cold and unyielding. Your best isn't good enough, dear. Maybe if you spent less time at that job of yours and more time here, things would be different. I looked at James, desperate for support, but he remained silent, his gaze fixed on his plate. In that moment, I realized the gravity of the situation. I was an outsider in my own home, my life hijacked by the unwelcome presence of the Carters. The tension in the house was like a thick fog, impossible to ignore. Every morning, I woke up to the same routine: prepare breakfast for 4, rush to work, then come back to a list of complaints and demands. It was like living with a ticking bomb, never knowing when the next explosion would be. One evening, I was in the kitchen, trying to juggle preparing dinner and responding to a flurry of work emails when Mrs. Carter came in, her cane tapping a steady, irritating beat on the floor. Anna, this kitchen is a mess. And what's for dinner? I hope it's not that bland chicken dish you made last week, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to snap back. I'm doing the best I can, Mrs. Carter. And it's pasta tonight. She sniffed, making it clear what she thought of my best. You know, if you weren't so tied up with that job of yours, maybe you'd manage the house better. That was it. The final straw. I turned to face her, my hands trembling with frustration. Mrs. Carter, I'm working this job to support us. And I'm also trying to manage the house. I'm only one person. I can't do everything. Her eyes narrowed. Well, maybe you should consider working from home then. That way, you can keep an eye on the house and still do your job. I was flabbergasted. Work from home? Just so I could clean up after them and cook on demand? The thought was suffocating. James and I have been talking, and we think it's the best solution, she continued, as if reading from a script. I felt a surge of anger. You've been talking? And what about me? Don't I get a say in this? Just then, James walked in, and I turned to him, hoping for some support. James, please tell me you don't agree with this. He looked uncomfortable, caught between his mother and his wife. Anna, it's just... Mom has a point. It would make things easier. Easier? For whom? Certainly not for me. I felt like I was drowning, and the people who were supposed to throw me a lifeline were instead pushing me further under. James, this is not about making things easier. It's about respect and boundaries. Your parents moved into my house, and now they're trying to dictate how I live and work. This is not okay, I said, my voice rising with every word. Mrs. Carter interjected, her tone patronizing. Anna, dear, we're family now. We should be helping each other, not arguing over trivial things. Trivial things? My job, my independence, my sanity, were these trivial things? I looked at James, searching his eyes for the man I married, the man who promised to stand by me. But all I saw was indecision, a man torn between his wife and his mother. Under the relentless pressure from Mrs. Carter and the passive compliance of James, I found myself boxed into a corner with no escape. The air in the house was thick with my silent acquiescence as I reluctantly agreed to work from home. Each day melted into the next, a monotonous blend of keystrokes, cooking, and cleaning, all under the watchful, often disapproving, gaze of Mrs. Carter. James, for his part, seemed blind to the imbalance, content to let the scales tip ever in favor of his parents. Then came that fateful evening, the one where the weight of my silence became too heavy to bear. We were gathered around the dinner table, the air heavy with the scent of the meal I had spent hours preparing. Mrs. Carter was mid-complaint about the seasoning of the chicken when I finally found my voice. "I'm tired," I said, the words falling from my lips like heavy stones. "I'm tired of trying to balance work and taking care of everyone's needs. Maybe it's time we considered living separately." The words hung in the air, a fragile bubble of hope destined to burst. Mrs. Carter paused, her fork midair, her eyes locking with mine. Then, to my utter disbelief, she nodded. "I agree," she said, her voice smooth as silk, her tone matter of fact. "This arrangement isn't ideal. But this house, it's so well equipped for our needs. So, Anna, it would make sense for you to find another place." The room spun, her words a gut punch that knocked the air from my lungs. I turned to James, desperate for him to intervene, to stand up for us, for our home. But the man I looked to for support merely echoed his mother's sentiment. "Mom's right, Anna. This house suits their needs. You can leave here if you like," he said, his words slicing through the last tether of my restraint. His words, so casually delivered, were the culmination of 1,000 tiny betrayals. The man I loved, the man I had built a life with, was offering up my sanctuary, my grandmother's legacy, on a silver platter to appease his parents. Without a word, I pushed my chair back and stood up. The legs of the chair scraped against the floor, the sound sharp and final. I could feel their eyes on me, wide with surprise, as I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I had looked up just moments ago, my fingers steady, my resolve unwavering. The room was silent except for the muffled voice on the other end of the phone. "Yes, I need to schedule a move," I said, my voice clear and loud enough for everyone to hear. A look of triumph flickered across Mrs. Carter's face, a smug smile curling her lips as she mistook my actions. She thought I was conceding, retreating from my own home. But the reality of my words hadn't hit her yet. I turned to face her, my eyes locking with hers. "Mrs. Carter, you seem to be misunderstanding the situation. The movers aren't for me. They're for you, your husband, and James. You have until the end of the day to pack your things and leave my house." The silence that followed was profound, the words hanging in the air like a verdict. Mrs. Carter's face drained of color, her triumphant smile faltering, transforming into a mask of disbelief and shock. But this is our home now. You can't just throw us out," she stammered, her voice trembling with a mix of outrage and fear. "This was never your home. You imposed yourselves, and your son allowed it. But I'm reclaiming what's rightfully mine," I replied, my voice unwavering. James was on his feet now, his face a mixture of confusion and desperation. "Anna, please, let's talk about this. You don't need to do this. We're a family." The word family hit me like a slap in the face. This was not how family treated each other. This was not how love manifested. James, a family respects each other. A family supports each other. What happened here was manipulation and disrespect. "I'll have the divorce papers sent to you tomorrow," I said, the finality of my words sealing the fate of our marriage. Mrs. Carter started to cry, her sobs a cacophony of disbelief and loss. James tried to plead, his words a jumbled mess of apologies and promises. But it was too late. The decision had been made, the line drawn. The day after the movers had cleared out the last of the Carters' belongings, I stood in the middle of my living room. The sun streamed through the windows, its light touching every corner, every surface, as if to cleanse the space of the heavy shadows of the past months. The house was quiet, a stark contrast to the constant noise and tension that had become my daily reality. I wandered from room to room, each step feeling lighter than the last. The house was mine again, my sanctuary, my refuge. I could breathe, truly breathe, without the weight of their expectations suffocating me. It was in this moment of solitude that the doorbell rang, a gentle chime that seemed too loud in the quiet of the house. I opened the door to find my friend Sarah standing there, a warm smile on her face and a casserole dish in her hands. "Heard you might need some company and comfort food," she said, stepping inside. We made our way to the kitchen, the aroma of the casserole filling the space, a scent of normalcy, of home. As we sat down at the table, Sarah reached for my hand, her touch grounding. "So, what now?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. I took a deep breath, the future a blank canvas before me. "Now, I start over. I rebuild, on my terms." "It's daunting, sure, but also liberating." Sarah nodded, her eyes reflecting understanding and support. "You know, sometimes the best beginnings come from the hardest endings. You've got this, Anna. You're stronger than you think." Her words resonated, a gentle reminder of the resilience that had carried me through the storm. "I guess it's time to find out what I'm really made of," I said, a tentative smile on my lips. The conversation flowed, the comfort of old friendship wrapping around me like a warm blanket. We talked about everything and nothing, the laughter and chatter a balm to my weary soul. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I realized that this was more than just a new beginning. It was a chance to rediscover myself, to redefine my boundaries, to live my life unapologetically. Hello there, my name's Sarah. I'm 27 and I've been working as a nurse for a while. My life has been a whirlwind of hospital shifts, patient checkups, and endless cups of coffee. The hospital corridors have been my world, and my social life? Well, that's been on life support for a while now. So, what's a girl to do when she's got no time to meet people the old-fashioned way? She goes online. I signed up for this dating site, nothing fancy, just one of those places where you hope to find someone who's not a complete weirdo. That's where I bumped into Ryan, virtually of course. His profile was plain, no show-off stuff. Just a guy with a genuine smile and a twinkle in his eyes. We started trading messages, and something clicked. We decided to meet up, see if this online chemistry had any basis in the real world. Our first date was at this cozy little cafe downtown. I walked in, and there he was, waiting for me. "Hey Sarah, you made it," he greeted, his face lighting up like a kid on Christmas morning. I was a bundle of nerves, but his easygoing nature calmed me down. We started chatting, just casual stuff at first. He was a software engineer, loved messing around with codes and all that. He was passionate about his work, but when he spoke about his mother, Margaret, his demeanor changed. "I'm all she's got, you know," he said, his voice dropping a bit. "My old man skipped out on us when I was just a kid. She's been alone since then. I try to help out, send her $1,000 every month. Ain't much, but it keeps her going." I admired his dedication, his sense of responsibility. I shared my own stories, about the grueling hours at the hospital, the emotional roller coaster that my job often was. He listened, really listened, not just nodding along. His eyes were full of understanding, and I felt a connection. As the weeks rolled by, I found myself falling for this guy. He was different, caring and attentive. He'd show up at the hospital when I was pulling late-night shifts, always with a hot meal in tow. He was a breath of fresh air in my otherwise monotonous life. One evening, while we were having dinner at his place, he looked at me, his eyes serious. "Sarah," he said, holding my hand across the table. "I've been doing some thinking. I really like you, more than just a girlfriend. I want us to be a team, you and me. What do you say, will you marry me?" His question caught me off guard. Sure, we hadn't been dating for too long, but there was no denying the love I felt for him. So, I said yes. We were over the moon, excited about our future together. But, boy, was I in for a ride. Little did I know that this decision would lead me down a path full of twists and turns. Life took a sudden turn after that dinner. I was now engaged to Ryan, a man I'd met online, who was as kind and caring as he was committed to his mom. The word fiancé had a new, exciting ring to it. We decided it was time to meet his mom, a woman who lived a couple of hours away in a small town. She was the epicenter of Ryan's world, the person whose opinion mattered the most to him. So, the plan was set: a weekend trip for the two of us to meet the woman who had raised my soon-to-be husband. The drive was filled with a strange tension. Ryan was visibly nervous, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror more often than necessary. He was a man on edge, and it wasn't hard to guess why. "Ryan," I said, trying to soothe his nerves. "Relax. I'm sure your mom is a wonderful person." He shot me a half-smile, his eyes still on the road. "Yeah, she's something all right." His mom's house was a picture of quaint charm, a small structure that looked like it had jumped straight out of a home and garden magazine. As we pulled up, I saw her waiting for us on the porch, a frail figure with a spark of defiance in her eyes. "Ryan, my boy," Margaret exclaimed as soon as we got out of the car, enveloping him in a tight hug. After a moment, she turned to me, her gaze icy. "You must be Sarah." I extended a hand, forcing a smile. "Yes, ma'am. It's a pleasure to meet you." The afternoon was a whirlwind of conversation, a deep dive into Ryan's life and his mom's sacrifices. She painted a vivid picture of their shared journey, of the struggles they'd overcome together. It was touching, but also a bit overwhelming. "So, Sarah," she said at one point, her eyes boring into me. "Ryan tells me you're a nurse." I nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I work at the city hospital." "And your family?" she asked, her gaze never wavering. "Who do you have?" I swallowed, a lump forming in my throat. I don't remember my parents. My grandmother raised me." She nodded, her eyes softening a bit. "Well, I suppose we all have our crosses to bear." The conversation took a strange turn then. She talked about blessing our marriage, but on one condition. We had to keep sending her the monthly $1,000. I was taken aback. I knew Ryan helped her out, but this felt different. It felt like a transaction. "Ma," Ryan said, his voice firm. "We're planning to get married, not sign a contract." Margaret shot him a stern look. "This is not a negotiation, Ryan. It's what I need." Ryan looked at me, his eyes pleading. It was a tough situation, one that I didn't want to escalate. So, I agreed. I agreed to this bizarre condition, for Ryan's sake. The wedding planning kicked off with a bang. Ryan and I were excited, brimming with ideas and dreams for our big day. We had decided on a simple ceremony, something that reflected our love and commitment without breaking the bank. After all, we had a significant monthly commitment to Ryan's mom, which kept our budget modest. But love, we believed, didn't need an extravagant show. Our venue was the local church, a charming little structure with an air of warmth and familiarity. Father John, the pastor and a dear friend of Ryan's, was more than willing to officiate our wedding. His twinkling eyes and hearty congratulations made us feel even more special. The guest list was a short one, a handful of work friends, Ryan's childhood buddies, and, of course, his mom. Margaret had a strong presence in our lives, and her involvement in the wedding planning was no different. She was there at every turn, her opinions shaping our choices, from the color scheme to the menu. "I think we should serve roast beef," she declared during one of our planning sessions. "Ryan loves it." Ryan, ever the dutiful son, nodded in agreement. "But Mom," he added, "Sarah's a vegetarian. We need to consider her too." His mom simply raised an eyebrow. "Well, it's your wedding too, isn't it?" Ryan didn't argue. He simply agreed and let his mom have her way. I didn't mind much. I was too caught up in the joy of marrying the man I loved. But there was another person who was deeply involved in our wedding planning, my grandmother. She was my rock, my guiding light. She had raised me single-handedly, and her wisdom and strength had always been my inspiration. Grandma was thrilled about the wedding. She helped me pick out a simple but elegant white dress. She baked cookies for the reception, her hands working magic in the kitchen. And she was there, always there, with a smile and a word of encouragement. The day of the wedding was a whirlwind of emotions. I was nervous, excited, and a little overwhelmed. Ryan looked dashing in his blue suit, his eyes sparkling with joy. His mom, in a striking red dress, was the life of the party, chatting and laughing with everyone. The ceremony was a beautiful, heartwarming affair. Father John spoke eloquently about love and commitment, his words resonating with everyone present. As Ryan and I exchanged our vows, I could see tears in Grandma's eyes. It was a moment I would cherish forever. The reception, held in the church hall, was a fun-filled event. The roast beef was a hit, and even though I couldn't partake, I was happy to see everyone enjoying it. Ryan's mom made sure to remind everyone that it was her idea. I didn't mind. I was too caught up in the joy of the day. As the day came to a close, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. We were married. We were starting a new chapter in our lives. I knew there would be challenges, but I was ready to face them. I had Ryan, and I had Grandma. I was ready for whatever life had in store for us. In the weeks following our wedding, Ryan and I were on cloud nine. We had moved into a small rented apartment and were slowly settling into our new life together. Our days were filled with love and laughter, and our nights with dreams of a future we were eager to build together. One of our major goals was to save for a down payment on a house. We had a plan, a budget, and a piggy bank that we lovingly called our future home. Every penny we saved was a step closer to our dream. But our financial plan had a significant dent, the $1,000 we sent to Ryan's mom every month. Ryan's mom was a constant presence in our lives, and not always a welcome one. She had a knack for showing up unannounced, often with a list of complaints and demands. Her favorite topic was her financial struggles and how we needed to help her more. One evening, she arrived at our apartment with a stack of papers. "Ryan, dear," she began, her voice dripping with sweetness, "we need to discuss something." Ryan, ever the obedient son, sat down with her, a look of concern on his face. "What is it, Mom?" he asked. She slid a paper across the table to him. "I need you to sign this," she said. It was a contract, a formal agreement that we, all the time we're married, would continue to send her $1,000 every month. But that wasn't all. She also wanted us to cover her utility bills, and part of other costs. Ryan was taken aback. "Mom, we're already helping you out every month. We can't afford all this," he protested. She simply shrugged. "You'll find a way," she said, her voice cold and unfeeling. I was speechless. The audacity of her demand was shocking. But before I could react, Ryan had already signed the contract. He looked at me apologetically. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said. "I didn't see this coming." I was seething with anger, not at Ryan, but at his mother. She was exploiting us, and it wasn't fair. "This isn't right," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "You can't just demand money from us like this." She simply smirked. "I just did." The drive home was a silent one. I was too angry, and Ryan was too guilty. Our dream of owning a home seemed to be slipping away, replaced by a growing pile of bills and obligations. Life was a non-stop roller coaster ride with Ryan and his mother. No matter what we did, it felt like we were always under her microscope, and every move we made was met with her disapproval. It was suffocating, and it was starting to eat away at our happiness. The situation reached boiling point one evening when she came over for her usual uninvited visit. Ryan and I had been discussing the possibility of starting a family. We were excited about the idea of bringing a new life into this world. But when I shared our plans with his mother, her reaction was far from supportive. "A baby? Are you two nuts?" Margaret bellowed, her face turning an alarming shade of red. "You can barely keep your heads above water, and now you want to add a baby to this circus?" I was taken aback by her outburst. "We've thought about this, and we believe we're ready," I countered, trying to keep my voice calm. She snorted. "Ready? You think you're ready? You can't even handle your own lives, and now you want to toss a baby into the mix?" I turned to Ryan, hoping he would step in, but he just sat there, his face ashen. His mother's words had struck a nerve, and he seemed lost for words. "Instead of thinking about a baby, you should be thinking about me," she continued, her voice rising with each word. "I'm not getting any younger. I need you to take care of me, not some snot-nosed brat." I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me. "We're not your babysitters," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "We have our own lives to live. And we won't let you dictate them." Margaret turned to Ryan, tears welling up in her eyes. "Is this how you treat your mother? Is this how you repay me for all I've done for you?" Ryan looked at me, then at his mother. I could see the turmoil in his eyes. He was caught between his loyalty to his mother and his love for me. Finally, he spoke up. "Mom's right, Sarah," he said, his voice wavering. "We're not ready for a baby. We have too many responsibilities already." His words were like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I turned to him, my eyes filled with disbelief. "So, you're taking her side now?" He didn't answer, just looked down at his hands. That was all the answer I needed. I got up and stormed out of the room, leaving Ryan and his mother alone. That night, Ryan and I had the biggest argument we've ever had. We yelled, we cried, we said things we didn't mean. But in the end, nothing was resolved. He still sided with his mother, and I was left feeling betrayed and alone. The following weeks were a nightmare. Ryan's mother was more intrusive than ever, and Ryan was more distant. As a result, I just stopped communicating with Margaret, even if it was rude, but not seeing her was already a great achievement. She called me an impudent girl and stopped calling me too. I'd been noticing a change in Ryan for a while. He was always on his phone, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he sent text after text. He was coming home late from work, his excuse always the same, "Just got caught up at the office, babe." I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. I tried to convince myself that it was just work stress, that he was just busy. But deep down, I knew something was off. My suspicions were confirmed when my best friend, Lisa, called me one evening. "Sarah, I don't know how to say this," she began, her voice shaking. "I found Ryan's profile on that dating site we used to use." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "What? That's impossible," I stammered, my mind racing. "He wouldn't." "I'm sorry, Sarah," Lisa said, her voice filled with sympathy. "I thought you should know." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was right there. When Ryan came home that night, I confronted him. "Who is she, Ryan?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. "Who are you texting all the time? Who are you meeting on that dating site?" Ryan looked at me, his face pale. "I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah," he stammered, his eyes darting around the room. "Don't lie to me, Ryan," I yelled, my patience wearing thin. "I know about the dating site. I know you're seeing someone else." Ryan didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at me. Then, he let out a sigh. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to find out this way." I felt a surge of anger. "So, you admit it? You've been cheating on me?" Ryan nodded, his eyes filled with guilt. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I didn't mean for this to happen. It just did." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I loved, the man I had planned to start a family with, was cheating on me. And to make matters worse, he wasn't even sorry about it. I want a divorce, Ryan, I said, my voice steady. I can't be with someone I can't trust. Ryan didn't argue, didn't try to convince me to stay. He just nodded, his face a mask of guilt and regret. 6 months had passed since my divorce from Ryan, and life was starting to settle into a new rhythm. I was learning to live alone, to be independent. Then, my grandmother passed away. She'd been a rock in my life, a woman of strength and wisdom. Her passing left me with a gaping hole, but also, unexpectedly, a considerable inheritance. She'd left me her old mansion, a beautiful house with vast gardens and rooms filled with antique furniture. And there was also a hefty sum of money, enough to let me live comfortably for the rest of my life. I was shocked, overwhelmed, but also grateful. It was a fresh start, a chance to rebuild my life. Just as I was starting to adjust to this new reality, there was a knock on the door. Standing on my doorstep was none other than Ryan's mother, a woman who'd always been a thorn in my side. "Well, look at you, living in luxury," she sneered, looking around the mansion with greedy eyes. "I heard about your little windfall. You must be over the moon." I crossed my arms, raising an eyebrow at her. "What do you want, Margaret?" She put on a saccharine smile, her eyes still scanning the house. "Well, dear, I thought it's only fair that since you and my son are married, I should get a share of this fortune." I couldn't help but laugh. "Margaret, you're out of the loop. Ryan and I divorced 6 months ago." Her eyes widened, and she sputtered, "What? No, that can't be right. Ryan would have told me." "Call him and ask," I suggested, leaning against the doorframe. "He'll confirm it." She pulled out her phone, dialed Ryan's number, and put it on speaker. "Ryan, tell me it's not true," she demanded when he answered. "Tell me you and Sarah are still married." There was a pause, and then Ryan's voice came through, sounding resigned. "No, Mom, we're not. We divorced 6 months ago." Ryan's mom ended the call, her face pale. "You've made a fool of me," she said, her voice trembling. "And you, Ryan, you're an idiot for letting this gold mine slip through your fingers." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed off, leaving me standing in the doorway, shaking with laughter. It felt good to finally stand up to Margaret, to see her taken down a peg. I'd been through a lot, but I was coming out the other side stronger, more confident. My new life was just beginning, and I was ready for whatever came next. I had a beautiful house, financial security, and most importantly, I was free from the shackles of an unhappy marriage. As I closed the door, I couldn't help but smile. Life was looking up. The sun had already started to set when I heard the knock. I opened the door to find my ex-husband, Ryan, standing there. His sudden appearance was as surprising as it was unwelcome. "What the hell are you doing here, Ryan?" I asked, my voice laced with annoyance. I heard about your inheritance, Sarah," he stammered, his eyes darting around the grand entrance of the mansion. "Is it true?" I crossed my arms over my chest, raising an eyebrow at him. "Yeah, it's true. My grandmother left me her house and a substantial amount of money." "What's it to you?" Ryan swallowed hard, his gaze never leaving mine. "I was thinking, maybe we could give it another shot, Sarah," he said, his voice shaky. "I've been a fool. I let my mother dictate our lives. I didn't stand up for you when I should have. I want to make it right." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Oh, now you want to make it right?" I asked, shaking my head in disbelief. "Now that I'm rich, you suddenly want to be a better man? You think I can't see right through you, Ryan?" Ryan looked taken aback by my words, but he quickly composed himself. "It's not like that, Sarah," he said, his voice filled with desperation. I've changed. I can be a better man. I can. I can make it up to you. I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. I could see the greed in his eyes, the dollar signs practically flashing in his pupils. He was no different from his arrogant mother. He was just after my money. Listen here, Ryan, I said, my voice cold as ice. You had your chance. You blew it. Now, you want to waltz back into my life because I've come into some money? You're even more pathetic than I thought. Ryan flinched at my words, but he didn't back down. I just want to make it right, Sarah, he pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. I just want another chance. I shook my head, a humorless smile on my face. You're not getting another chance, Ryan, I said, my voice steady. You're not getting a dime of my money. Now get off my property before I call the cops. With that, I slammed the door in his face, leaving him standing on the doorstep. I could hear him calling out to me, begging for forgiveness, but I ignored him. I had better things to do than listen to his empty promises and pleas. I walked away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I'd finally stood up to Ryan, to his manipulations and his lies. I'd finally stood up for myself. In the weeks that followed, I found myself thinking about Ryan less and less. I was moving on, slowly but surely. I was building a new life for myself, a life that was mine and mine alone. I made new friends, people who liked me for who I was, not for my money or my mansion. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding joy in helping those who couldn't help themselves. I was finally living my life on my own terms, and it felt amazing. I'm Irene, navigating life at 30 with a mix of web design and motherhood. Our family nucleus was simple, me, my husband Mike, and our 2-year-old sunshine, Danny. Our world was comfortably wrapped within the walls of our home, which stood as a testament to the life we built together. Mike worked for my dad's company, a job he was proud of, and I carved pixels into designs from my home studio. Our routine was pleasantly mundane until one evening at my parents' house, where family dinners were more than just meals, they were gatherings punctuated by discussions, laughter, and, sometimes, life-changing announcements. So, I'd been thinking, my dad began, his voice commanding the room's attention. He was a self-made man, a pillar of wisdom in business suits. We're expanding the company. There's a new branch opening in the neighboring city, and I want Mike to take the lead on this. Mike, who had always admired my dad, perked up immediately. His eyes gleamed with a mix of excitement and determination. Mr. Thompson, that's a fantastic opportunity. I'm all in. I felt a surge of pride and excitement. That's wonderful news. We should all move there for the project duration. It's just a few months, and it'll be like a little adventure, I said, already envisioning our temporary life in a new city. Unexpectedly, Mike hesitated, casting a glance that didn't quite reach his usual confidence. Actually, Irene, it might be better if you and Danny stay here. Moving could be a hassle for the little guy. His words hit me unexpectedly, like a cold splash of reality in our warm, cozy life. But Mike, I thought we were in this together. And it's not like we have to uproot our lives. I can work from anywhere, and it would be a nice change for Danny. My dad nodded in agreement, his voice echoing my thoughts. Mike, Irene has a point. The family should stick together in such times. And Irene's job gives her that flexibility. Mike seemed to be caught off guard, a nervous chuckle escaping him. I was just joking. Of course, you both should come along. But that joke didn't sit right with me. It lingered in the air, an uninvited guest at our family dinner. The evening progressed with Dad and Mike diving into the logistics of the new business venture, but my mind was stuck on Mike's initial reaction. Why the hesitation? Why the reluctance? Later that night, after tucking Danny into bed, I found myself sitting across from Mike in our living room. The house was quiet, a stark contrast to the turmoil in my mind. "Mike, about dinner tonight," I started, my voice a blend of confusion and concern. "You really caught me off guard, suggesting that Danny and I shouldn't join you. Is there something on your mind?" He looked up from his phone, meeting my gaze for the first time since we sat down. "Irene, I didn't mean to upset you. It's just that setting up a new branch will be demanding. I thought it'd be easier for you to stay put, avoid the stress of moving." I leaned forward, searching his face for the familiar comfort. "But we've always faced challenges together. That's what we do. Why would this time be any different?" Mike sighed, putting his phone down. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "You're right, we do. And we will. I guess I was just overthinking it. It was a silly thought, nothing more." His words were meant to reassure, but they hung heavy in the room, a reminder that something in our equation had shifted, however slightly. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs just when you think you've got it all figured out. Our little family was on the brink of a new adventure, or so I thought, until Danny, our 2-year-old bundle of joy, decided to rewrite our plans. It started with a mild fever, nothing too alarming at first, but it quickly escalated. I remember holding Danny in my arms, feeling his little body burning up as I dialed our family doctor. "Dr. Jacobs, Danny's fever isn't coming down." "I'm really worried," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. After a thorough checkup, Dr. Jacobs' expression was serious. "Irene, I'm afraid it's more than just a common cold. Danny needs rest and cannot travel for a while. Moving to a new city is out of the question right now." The news hit me like a ton of bricks. I called Mike that evening, the weight of uncertainty heavy in my voice. "Mike, Danny's sick. The doctor advised against traveling. We can't join you for now." On the other end, there was a pause before Mike responded. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Oh, is it serious? Well, that's okay, Irene. He needs to get better. We can manage." Something about his response didn't sit right with me. There was an undertone of relief, perhaps even contentment, that Danny and I wouldn't be joining him. It gnawed at me, that unsettling feeling of doubt. The weeks that followed were tough. Danny's illness turned out to be a stubborn infection that took its time healing. My days and nights merged into a blur of caregiving, leaving little room for anything else. Mike's calls became infrequent, and when he did call, his words felt rehearsed, lacking the warmth I was used to. "Everything's okay here, Irene. Just busy with work. How's Danny?" I'd update him, hoping for more engagement, but the conversations were brief and perfunctory. "He's getting better, slowly. We miss you, Mike." "Yeah, I miss you guys too," he'd reply, but it sounded hollow, as if he was saying it out of obligation rather than feeling. The distance was growing, not just in miles, but in our connection. It felt like Mike was slipping away, retreating into a world I wasn't part of. One evening, after a particularly short and unsatisfying call with Mike, I sat in the living room long after Danny had fallen asleep. The silence of the house echoed my thoughts. Was this what our life was going to be now? Mike distant and preoccupied, and me, alone, holding down the fort? Days turned into weeks, and the distance between Mike and me felt more than just miles apart. It was as if he was slowly drifting away, becoming a stranger. His calls, once filled with laughter and warmth, were now just formal check-ins. One evening, as I was putting Danny to bed, my phone buzzed. It was Mike. "Hey, how's Danny doing?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual tenderness. "He's better, still recovering," I replied, hoping to stir some emotion in him. "Work's crazy here," he said, sounding distracted. I sat down in the living room, the silence engulfing me. "Mike, we barely talk these days. Is everything okay with you? You seem different." There was a pause on the line. "Different? No, I'm just really busy, Irene. You know how it is starting up a new branch. I tried to keep the conversation going, to bridge the growing gap. I understand you're busy, but it feels like you're not just physically away. It's like I don't know you anymore. He let out a sigh. Irene, you're overthinking it. It's just stress, that's all. Once things settle down here, it'll be better. But his reassurances did little to ease my growing concerns. His words felt empty, devoid of the connection we once shared. Weeks passed, and Mike's brief return home did little to quell my fears. He was physically present, but emotionally distant. He spent most of his time either working on his laptop or engrossed in his phone. One night, I decided to confront him. Mike, we need to talk. You've been distant ever since you took this new job. Is there something you're not telling me? He looked up from his phone, his expression a mix of annoyance and surprise. Irene, why do you keep saying that? I'm right here. But you're not really. You're always on your phone or laptop. It's like you're here, but your mind is somewhere else, I said, my voice tinged with frustration. Mike closed his laptop with a sigh. Look, Irene, I've got a lot on my plate right now. The new branch, the pressures from your dad, it's a lot to handle. I'm just trying to do my best. I nodded, trying to understand. I get that, Mike, but we're a team, remember? If there's something bothering you, you can talk to me. He shook his head, a half-smile on his face. There's nothing to talk about, Irene. I'm just busy, that's all. You're making a big deal out of nothing. But it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like a chasm was forming between us, one that I couldn't bridge, no matter how hard I tried. The day started routinely enough, with the familiar hum of my computer and the soft breathing of Danny during his nap. I was deep in thought, maneuvering through the complexities of a web design project, when a knock at the door jolted me back to reality. Opening it, I found myself face to face with a stranger, his eyes weary yet determined. Can I help you? I asked, curiosity mingling with a hint of apprehension. Yes, you're Irene, Mike's wife, right? I'm David. His voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of nervousness. I nodded, still unsure where this was going. That's me. What is this about? David took a deep breath, as if bracing himself. I believe your husband, Mike, is having an affair with my wife. His words hit me like a ton of bricks. That's impossible, I stammered, disbelief clouding my thoughts. Mike wouldn't do that. There's got to be some mistake. I thought the same at first, David admitted, reaching into his pocket. But then I found this. He handed me his phone, his hand shaking slightly. The photos displayed on the screen were heart-wrenching. There was Mike, undeniably him, in a series of intimate moments with a woman I didn't recognize. They were laughing, embracing, their closeness leaving no room for doubt. I felt my world spin as I handed back the phone. Why are you showing me this? My voice cracked, barely a whisper under the weight of my crumbling reality. David's gaze was sympathetic yet firm. Because you deserve to know the truth. And I think we should do something about it. A mixture of emotions surged through me, anger, betrayal, and an overwhelming sense of loss. What do you mean, do something about it? He leaned against the door frame, his posture suggesting a man who had nothing left to lose. I have a plan. A way to confront them, to bring this out into the open. I can't just let this go, and I don't think you should either. My mind raced. Part of me wanted to shut the door and pretend this never happened, but another, stronger part knew I couldn't live with the uncertainty. What kind of plan? We need more evidence, something undeniable. I propose we catch them together, in the act, David explained, his voice laced with a mix of pain and resolve. The idea was daunting, yet it resonated with the part of me that craved closure. How would we do that? I know where and when they meet. If you're willing, we can confront them, together, he proposed, his eyes searching mine for a decision. The thought of facing Mike in such a scenario was terrifying, yet the need for the truth, for some semblance of control in the chaos, was overpowering. Okay, I'm in. I need to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As David left, I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the weight of the decision I had just made. The path ahead was fraught with pain and uncertainty, but I knew there was no turning back. The truth was out there, and I had to face it, for my sake and for Danny's. The reality of what David and I were about to do hit me as we sat in the dimly lit apartment next door to Mike's. We were there to unveil the truth, using the thin walls to our advantage. The apartment, ironically provided by my father's company for Mike, was now the stage for uncovering his betrayal. David was setting up a small recording device, his hands steady but his eyes betraying a storm of emotions. "Can't believe it's come to this," he muttered, more to himself than to me. I nodded, feeling a knot of anxiety in my stomach. "Neither can I. But we need to know, right?" As we waited, the silence between us was heavy, filled with unspoken fears and questions. Then, the sound of a door opening next door broke the stillness. My heart skipped a beat, and I saw David tense up. "That's them," he said, his voice barely a whisper. We moved closer to the wall, straining to hear. The voices were muffled at first, but then clearer. It was Mike, his laughter unmistakable, mingling with a woman's voice, his mistress. I clenched my fists, fighting back a surge of emotions. The intimacy in their voices was like a knife twisting in my heart. "Are you getting this?" David asked, his voice tight with anger. I nodded, holding the recorder close to the wall. "Yes, it's all being recorded." The sounds from the other side of the wall continued, laughter, conversation, and then unmistakably more intimate noises. It was excruciating to sit there, hearing Mike betray our family so blatantly. But amid the heartache, there was a growing sense of resolve. We were gathering the evidence we needed, undeniable proof of their betrayal. After what felt like an eternity, the noises ceased, and a heavy silence fell over our makeshift surveillance spot. David and I exchanged a look, a mix of sorrow and determination in our eyes. "We have what we need," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Now we confront them." David nodded, his jaw set. "Let's do it now. No point waiting." As we stood up, I felt a strange sense of empowerment mixed with dread. The life I had known with Mike was over, and confronting him was the first step into a new, uncertain future. "We need to catch them off guard," David said as we moved toward the door. I agreed, clutching the recorder like a lifeline. "Let's go. It's time they faced the consequences." Stepping out of the apartment, the weight of the moment settled on my shoulders. We were about to face the people who had turned our lives upside down. The confrontation would be painful, but necessary. David and I stood in the dimly lit corridor outside Mike's apartment, our hearts racing with a mix of anxiety and determination. The plan was simple, but bold. David would pretend to be a courier, a ruse to ensure Mike would open the door. David knocked firmly, announcing loudly enough to be heard through the door, "Delivery." We heard footsteps approaching from inside. The door swung open, and there stood Mike, his face transitioning from annoyance to shock as his eyes landed on me. "Irene? What the hell are you doing here?" I took a deep breath, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside. "We need to talk, Mike. Can I come in?" Behind Mike, the mistress, a young woman with a startled expression, stood frozen. Reluctantly, Mike stepped aside, allowing us entry. The room felt tense, charged with unspoken accusations and fear. Without mincing words, David confronted Mike. "We know about the affair, Mike. You can drop the act." Mike's reaction was a mix of defensiveness and scorn. This is nothing. She seduced me. I was just caught up." His mistress, now visibly shaken, retorted, "What? No, you were as much in this as I was." Ignoring her, Mike turned to me, trying to downplay the situation. "Irene, listen, this isn't what it looks like." I couldn't hold back any longer. "Not what it looks like?" "I heard everything, Mike. We have recordings." Mike glanced at the recording device in David's hand, his face turning pale. "Recordings? Irene, you've got to understand." "There's nothing to understand," I cut him off, my voice rising in anger. "You betrayed our family, Mike. You betrayed me and Danny." He started to say something but stopped, realizing the gravity of his situation. "Irene, please," Mike's voice trailed off as he fell to his knees, a pathetic figure of desperation. "Forgive me, I made a mistake. Please, don't tell your father about this." I looked down at him, feeling a mix of pity and revulsion. "You think I can just forgive and forget? I'm going to demand compensation for this betrayal. And yes, I will tell my father. He deserves to know the kind of man you really are." Mike's face crumpled in despair, but there was no going back. The trust we had was shattered beyond repair. David, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "You're going to pay for this, Mike. Both of you." The mistress, now crying, looked completely overwhelmed. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." As we left the apartment, leaving Mike and his mistress to their own messy reality, I felt a strange sense of closure. It was painful and heart-wrenching, but necessary. The confrontation was over, and with it, a chapter of my life had ended. Stepping out into the brisk evening air, the weight of what had just transpired in Mike's apartment hung heavily over me. David and I walked in silence to a nearby park bench. The noise of the city around us felt distant, muffled by the shock and turmoil churning inside. David was the first to break the silence. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Irene. But at least now you know the truth." I nodded, feeling numb. "Yes, the truth." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "What are you going to do now?" He looked down, his hands clenched tightly. "I need to think. There's a lot to process. But one thing is clear, I can't stay with her after this." "I understand," I said softly. The reality of my own situation was beginning to sink in. I need to start planning for a life without Mike. For Danny's sake. David looked at me, empathy in his eyes. "If you need anything, any help, just let me know." I managed a weak smile. "Thank you, David. I appreciate it." We sat there for a while longer, lost in our own thoughts, before parting ways. As I walked back to my parents' house, where Danny was staying, the magnitude of the situation hit me. My marriage was over, and the life I had known was shattered. When I arrived, my parents immediately sensed something was wrong. "Irene, what happened? You look upset," my mom asked, concern etched on her face. I sighed, not sure where to begin. "Mom, Dad, I found out Mike has been having an affair." The room went silent. My dad's expression hardened. "Are you sure?" I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "Yes, I'm sure. I heard them, and I have recordings." My mom reached out, taking my hand. "Oh, Irene, I'm so sorry. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to file for divorce," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "I can't be with him after this. It's over." My dad, always the protector, spoke up. "He won't get away with this. I'll make sure of that. And you and Danny will always have a home here." I felt tears welling up in my eyes, grateful for their support. "Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you both." The final chapter of my marriage to Mike was written in a lawyer's office, amidst a sea of paperwork and legal jargon. The divorce process was grueling but necessary. I fought hard, with my lawyer by my side, to ensure that Danny and I would have the financial security we needed. The court granted me alimony and compensation for Mike's betrayal, a small solace in the wake of our shattered life. Meanwhile, David, the man who had been thrust into my life by our shared misfortune, also finalized his divorce. His wife, once living a life of luxury, now faced a starkly different reality. She had to trade her affluent lifestyle for a job as a saleswoman in a retail store, a harsh consequence of her actions. As for Mike, the repercussions of his infidelity were far-reaching. My father, once a mentor and supporter, was ruthless in his response. He not only fired Mike from the company, but also made it clear that he would use his influence to prevent Mike from securing a position in any reputable firm. The man who once had a promising career now juggled two menial jobs, struggling to make ends meet. Life after the divorce was a journey of healing and rediscovery for me. I focused on raising Danny, ensuring that the upheaval in our lives didn't dim his bright, innocent spirit. Watching him grow, laugh, and explore the world was a balm to my bruised heart. My work as a web designer provided not just a financial lifeline, but also a welcome distraction. I threw myself into my projects, finding joy and fulfillment in creating and designing. It was a reminder that despite the chaos, I still had control over some aspects of my life. My parents were my rock during this time. They provided unwavering support, offering a safe haven for Danny and me. "You're stronger than you realize, Irene," my dad would often say. And as time passed, I began to believe him. In the quiet moments, often after I had put Danny to bed, I would reflect on the tumultuous journey. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but it was slowly being replaced by a newfound strength and independence. I had navigated through the darkest of times and emerged on the other side, not unscathed, but certainly stronger. As I closed the chapter on a painful part of my life, I opened a new one, filled with possibilities and the promise of a fresh start. My journey was not over, it was merely taking a new path, one that I was ready to travel with hope and determination. My name is Elaine. I'm a 56-year-old doctor at our local hospital, a profession that has been both my calling and my refuge, especially since becoming a widow 2 decades ago. My life, outside of the hospital, revolves around my only son, Thomas, a 30-year-old who recently told me about his serious relationship with a girl named Clara. He described her in such glowing terms that I was both curious and eager to meet her. So, I invited them over for dinner. The day of their visit, I was a bundle of nerves. I wanted everything to be perfect. I prepared my signature dishes, a golden baked chicken, sweet milk pudding, and a hearty salad with chicken eggs, amongst others. I hoped these familiar comforts would make Clara feel welcome. When they arrived, Clara was noticeably thin and somewhat pale, but I brushed off my initial concern, attributing it to nerves, or perhaps a dietary choice I wasn't yet aware of. I greeted them warmly. "Welcome, Clara. It's so lovely to finally meet you," I said with a smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Elaine," Clara replied politely, though her voice was barely above a whisper. We settled in the living room for a bit before moving to the dining room. I could sense Thomas's excitement as he introduced Clara to my home. However, the atmosphere shifted drastically once we sat down for dinner. Clara's eyes widened in shock when she saw the baked chicken on the table. Her face contorted into a look of disgust as she exclaimed, "I can't believe you're serving this. I'm a hard vegetarian. I don't eat such things." Thomas turned beet red. "Mom, I'm so sorry, I should have told you about Clara's diet," he stammered. Clara cut in sharply, "Thomas, you're such a fool. How could you not mention something so important?" I was taken aback by her harsh words. It was uncomfortable to see Thomas being scolded like that. Quickly trying to remedy the situation, I offered, "Clara, I'm sorry about the misunderstanding. Perhaps you'd like to try some of the other dishes? Do they have any animal products? Eggs? Milk?" Clara interrogated, her tone accusatory. "Yes, they do," I replied, feeling a growing sense of unease. She slammed her hand on the table, pushing away the dishes. I can't even stand the sight of them. Clara stood up abruptly and stormed out of the house, leaving Thomas to mutter an apology before running after her. Several months after the disastrous dinner, Thomas and Clara's wedding day arrived. Despite my reservations about Clara, I put on a brave face for my son's sake. The wedding, as I'd been forewarned, was entirely vegetarian. I had never been to a wedding like this before, and neither had most of our family. As I walked into the venue, I couldn't help but feel out of place. The decorations were beautiful, but the atmosphere was unfamiliar. Clara's friends, also vegetarians, mingled amongst themselves, discussing the virtues of their dietary choices. My sister, Martha, leaned over to me and whispered, "Elaine, have you seen the menu? I can't pronounce half of these dishes." I smiled wryly. "Just go with it, Martha. It's Thomas's day." The ceremony was lovely, but the reception was where things got interesting. The array of vegetarian dishes was certainly exotic. My relatives poked at their food with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. During the meal, my brother-in-law, George, a man never known for his tact, called a waiter over. "Excuse me, son, is there any chance we could get a steak or something? Just a small one?" The waiter, trying to remain polite, responded, "I'm sorry, sir. The menu is strictly vegetarian as per the couple's request." George grunted, "Well, I guess it's salad for dinner then." Despite the unfamiliar food, I tried to focus on the positive. Thomas looked genuinely happy, albeit a bit thinner than I remembered. As the evening progressed, I observed Clara. She was the center of attention among her friends, laughing and seeming in her element. Yet, there was an edge to her laughter, a sharpness that made me uneasy. A few days after the wedding, Thomas came to visit me alone. His appearance startled me. He had lost more weight and looked tired. "Thomas, are you all right? You've lost so much weight," I said, concern evident in my voice. He sighed, looking down at his hands. "Mom, Clara's been, well, she's put me on a strict vegetarian diet too. Says it's non-negotiable." I was taken aback. "But, Thomas, your job is physically demanding. You need a balanced diet." He shrugged helplessly. "I know, Mom, but I want to make her happy. It's been hard adjusting." I watched him leave later, feeling a mix of sadness and frustration. Clara's influence over him was more profound than I had feared. My son, once so vibrant and full of life, now seemed a shadow of his former self. After several sleepless nights, filled with worry about Thomas, I decided it was time to take action. I couldn't stand by and watch my son's health deteriorate. With a heavy heart, I picked up the phone to call Clara, Thomas's wife. I hoped that as a doctor, I could express my concerns in a way that would resonate with her. "Hello, Clara. It's Elaine, Thomas's mother. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time," I began, my voice as warm and friendly as I could muster. "What do you want, Elaine?" Clara's voice was cold, distant. "I'm calling about Thomas," I said cautiously. "I've noticed he's lost quite a bit of weight and seems very tired lately. I'm worried it could be related to his new diet." Clara let out a sigh, audibly annoyed. "Look, Elaine, Thomas is perfectly fine. He's just adapting to a healthier way of eating. You're overreacting." "I understand your perspective, Clara, but as a doctor, I see signs of nutritional deficiencies in Thomas. He works a physically demanding job, and a strict vegetarian diet without proper planning can lead to health issues," I explained, trying to keep the conversation civil and factual. "Elaine, I don't need a lecture on nutrition from you. We've done our research. Thomas is on a balanced vegetarian diet, and that's that." "You're not a dietitian," Clara retorted sharply. "But Clara, there are certain nutrients that are hard to get from a vegetarian diet alone, especially for someone with Thomas's lifestyle. Perhaps we could work together to find a diet that meets his nutritional needs and aligns with your dietary preferences? I suggested, hoping for a compromise. Clara's voice rose in frustration. I'm not interested in your help, Elaine. Thomas is my husband, and we make our decisions together. You need to respect that and stay out of it. Before I could respond, she hung up. I stared at the phone, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. Clara's unwillingness to even consider my concerns was alarming. Later that day, my sister, Karen, came over. I shared the distressing phone call with her. Karen, I don't know what to do. Clara just shut me down. She wouldn't even listen to my concerns about Thomas, I shared, my hands trembling slightly. Karen, always a source of practical advice, looked thoughtful. Elaine, it's a tough situation. But maybe Thomas needs to come to this realization on his own. Clara obviously has a strong influence on him. I nodded, knowing she was right, yet feeling uneasy. I just can't sit back and watch Thomas suffer. He's always been a bit too accommodating, and now it's affecting his health. Karen reached across the table, squeezing my hand. I know, Elaine. But sometimes stepping back is the only way they learn. Maybe when Thomas sees the toll it's taking on him, he'll make a change. A few days after my futile conversation with Clara, Thomas came to visit me unexpectedly. It was a cold, gray afternoon, the kind that made you want to stay indoors. When I opened the door, the sight of him took my breath away. He looked nothing like the son I knew. His face was drawn and pale, his eyes lacking their usual spark. But it was the scratches on his face that alarmed me the most. Thomas, what happened to you? I exclaimed, ushering him inside. He avoided my gaze, a sign that he was uncomfortable. It's nothing, Mom, just a little argument with Clara. I led him to the living room, my mind racing with worry. Argument? Thomas, she scratched your face. This is serious. He finally looked at me, his eyes weary. I know, Mom. I don't know what to do anymore. I fetched my first aid kit and began treating his scratches gently. Tell me what happened, Thomas. You know you can talk to me. He sighed, a deep, troubled sigh. I went out for a quick bite. I just wanted to eat something more high-calorie and tasty, you know? I went to this cafe and ordered a burger. Clara saw me through the window. She stormed in and made a huge scene. I couldn't hide my shock. A scene? Over a burger? Thomas nodded, looking down at his hands. Yeah, she was screaming about me betraying our lifestyle, our values. She said I was poisoning myself. Then she scratched my face and told me to leave the house. I finished bandaging his face, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. Thomas, this isn't healthy. You can't live like this. Being forced to change your diet and then being attacked for eating a burger? It's not right. He leaned back on the sofa, closing his eyes. I know, Mom. But I love her. I thought I could make this work. I sat beside him, my heart aching for my son. Love shouldn't be this hard, Thomas. It shouldn't hurt like this. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Thomas spoke up. I think I'll stay here tonight, if that's okay. I just need some time to think. Of course, you can stay as long as you need, I replied, trying to offer him a comforting smile. That evening, as I cooked dinner, I kept glancing at Thomas, who was sitting at the kitchen table, lost in thought. I prepared a simple, hearty meal, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and steamed vegetables. The kind of food I knew he loved. As we ate, I tried to lighten the mood. Remember when you were a kid, and you wouldn't eat anything but chicken nuggets for a week? Thomas managed a small smile. Yeah, I was a picky eater. But I always loved your cooking, Mom. I reached across the table, squeezing his hand. You're always welcome here, Thomas. You're my son, and I just want you to be happy and healthy. He squeezed back, a glimmer of the old Thomas in his eyes. Thanks, Mom. I really needed this. The next couple of weeks passed in a blur of worry and sleepless nights. Then, one ordinary Thursday, my world was rocked by a phone call that every parent dreads. It was the hospital. Mrs. Parker, your son Thomas was brought in this morning. He's been in an accident, the voice on the other end said, calm yet impersonal. My heart skipped a beat. Is he all right? What happened? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He's stable now, but he lost consciousness at the wheel. He's lucky, the injuries aren't serious. You can come and see him, the caller replied. I hurried to the hospital, my mind racing with 1,000 fears. When I arrived, I saw Thomas lying in a hospital bed, looking even more pale and thin than before. Thomas, oh my God, are you all right? I gasped, rushing to his side. He managed a weak smile. I'm okay, Mom. Just a bit shaken up. A doctor I knew, Dr. Simmons, came into the room. Elaine, we've given him a thorough checkup. Physically, he's fine, just a few bruises. But his blood tests show signs of malnourishment. It seems he fainted due to low blood sugar. I turned to Thomas, my worry turning into anger. Malnourishment? Thomas, is this because of your diet? Thomas avoided my gaze, nodding slightly. I guess I haven't been eating properly. Clara's been so strict about the diet. I turned to Dr. Simmons. Can we make sure he gets a proper meal here? Something substantial? Of course, Elaine. We'll take care of him, Dr. Simmons assured me. I sat by Thomas's bed, holding his hand. Thomas, this has to stop. You could have been killed. All because of this diet. Thomas sighed, a look of resignation on his face. I know, Mom. I just wanted to make Clara happy. But not at the cost of your health, Thomas. This isn't just about food, it's about control. She can't dictate what you eat to this extent, I said, my voice firm but filled with concern. He looked away, his eyes filling with tears. I love her, Mom. I thought love was about compromises. Compromises, yes. But not like this. Not when it puts you in danger, I replied, squeezing his hand. We sat in silence for a while, the beeping of the heart monitor the only sound in the room. Thomas eventually drifted off to sleep, exhausted from the ordeal. I tried to call Clara, but she didn't answer the phone. Maybe she was afraid of my reaction to what had happened, or maybe she didn't care. After Thomas was discharged from the hospital, I insisted he stay with me for a while. Clara didn't mind. At least she didn't reply to my message. Thomas needed proper care, and I wanted to make sure he got back on his feet, both physically and emotionally. The first evening at my house, I prepared a hearty meal. As I set the table, I could see Thomas eyeing the food with a mix of hunger and hesitation. Mom, this looks amazing, but I don't know if I should. Clara might not like it, Thomas said, a troubled look crossing his face. Thomas, right now, you need to focus on your health. Clara isn't here, and you need to eat, I responded firmly, serving him a generous portion of roasted chicken and vegetables. He reluctantly began to eat, and with each bite, I saw a bit of color return to his cheeks. This is really good, Mom. I didn't realize how much I missed her cooking. I sat across from him, watching him eat. Thomas, you've always been healthy. It's painful to see you like this. Your relationship with Clara, it's not just about food. It's about control and your well-being. Thomas set his fork down, his expression pained. I know, Mom. I just don't know what to do. I love her, but everything is so complicated now. Love shouldn't make you compromise your health or who you are. You've always been considerate and caring, but you can't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. I said, hoping my words would resonate with him. Over the next few days, I took care of Thomas, ensuring he ate well and rested. We talked a lot, about everything and nothing. I avoided pressing him about Clara, hoping he would come to his own conclusions. One evening, as we were sitting in the living room, Thomas spoke up. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot. Maybe I've been trying too hard to please Clara, losing myself in the process." I nodded. "It's important to find a balance, Thomas. In a relationship, both people should feel valued and respected." He looked at me, a newfound determination in his eyes. "I'm going to talk to Clara. I need to be honest about how I feel, about the diet, and everything else." I reached over, squeezing his hand. "Whatever you decide, Thomas, I'm here for you. Just remember, your health and happiness are what's most important." As Thomas went to bed that night, I felt a mix of hope and apprehension. He was at a crossroads, and the next steps he took would shape his future. All I could do was support him and hope that he found the strength to make the right decisions for himself. The situation escalated quickly when Clara, Thomas's wife, burst into my house during lunch. Thomas was just starting to look a bit better after days of proper nutrition at my place. "Thomas, what are you doing?" Clara shrieked as she saw him eating the chicken broth I'd made. Thomas looked up, startled. "Clara, I'm just..." "You're betraying our lifestyle again. I can't believe this." Clara was livid, her eyes blazing with anger. Before I could intervene, she knocked the bowl of broth from Thomas's hands, sending it crashing to the floor. I stood up, my own anger rising at her irrational behavior. "Clara, that's enough. You're in my house, and I won't tolerate this behavior," I said firmly. "You're poisoning him, Elaine, with your meat and your old-fashioned ideas," Clara shouted, turning her wrath towards me. Thomas tried to calm her down. "Clara, please, let's just talk about this." Ignoring him, Clara pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police. I won't let you harm him any further." Thomas and I exchanged a look of disbelief as Clara dialed. Within minutes, a police car pulled up outside, and 2 officers came to the door. "What seems to be the problem here?" one of the officers asked, looking between Clara, Thomas, and me. Clara immediately began, pointing a finger at me. "She's been forcing my husband to eat meat. She's trying to poison him against his will." The officer turned to me, his expression one of mild confusion and concern. "Ma'am, is this true?" I shook my head. "No, officer. I'm Thomas's mother, and I've been taking care of him. He's been unwell due to malnutrition. I'm a doctor, and I was just trying to help him recover." Thomas spoke up, his voice weak but steady. "It's true, officers. I've been staying with my mom for a few days to get my health back." I went to my kitchen counter and picked up a hospital report. Here's the report from when Thomas was admitted after fainting due to low blood sugar. His diet was insufficient, and that's what I've been trying to address. The officers took the report, glancing over it. Clara's face turned pale as the reality of the situation started to dawn on her. "Ma'am, it looks like Mrs. Parker has been acting in her son's best interest," the officer said to Clara. "If there's no actual harm or criminal activity here, we can't take any action." Clara was speechless, her earlier fury deflated. The officers advised her to resolve the matter peacefully and left. Thomas looked exhausted by the whole ordeal. "Clara, I think you should go. We need to talk, but not now. Not like this." Clara, still in shock, quietly left the house without another word. I watched her go, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. The whole situation had spiraled out of control, and I worried about what this meant for Thomas's future with Clara. In the weeks that followed the police intervention, Thomas stayed with me, slowly regaining his strength and clarity of mind. We had many long conversations about his marriage and future. One evening, as we sat in the living room, a sense of resolve seemed to settle over him. Mom, I've made a decision, Thomas said, his voice more assertive than I'd heard in a long time. I looked at him, feeling a mix of apprehension and relief. What have you decided, Thomas? I can't go on like this with Clara. Our marriage, it's not healthy. I'm going to file for a divorce, he declared, though I could see the pain in his eyes. I reached out, taking his hand. I know this must be hard for you, but I think you're making the right choice. You deserve to be happy and healthy, Thomas. He nodded, a sad smile on his lips. I know. I just wish it didn't have to come to this. The next few days were a whirlwind as Thomas set the divorce process in motion. It was a tough time, but he handled it with a strength that made me proud. When the day came for him to move back into his own place, I helped him pack his things. As he was about to leave, he turned to me. Mom, I can't thank you enough. You've been my rock through all of this. I hugged him tightly. You're my son. I'll always be here for you, no matter what. A couple of weeks after Thomas moved out, I received a call from him. He sounded different, more like his old self. Mom, I wanted to tell you that the divorce has been finalized. And I decided to take legal action against Clara for her role in the accident. I was surprised. That's a big step, Thomas. Are you sure about this? Yes, I am. It's not just about me. It's about setting things right. And, you know, the court ruled in my favor. Clara has to pay me compensation, he explained. I could hear the confidence in his voice. I'm proud of you, Thomas. You're standing up for yourself. There was a pause before he spoke again. I've also started seeing a counselor. I think it's helping me understand a lot about myself and my relationships. Hearing this brought a sense of peace to my heart. That's wonderful, Thomas. Taking care of your mental health is just as important. As we ended the call, I felt a wave of emotions. The past months had been a roller coaster, but through it all, Thomas had found his way back to himself. He had faced his challenges head-on and emerged stronger. The future was uncertain, but I knew that whatever it held, Thomas was now better equipped to face it. And as for me, I would continue to be there for him, his steadfast support, as I had always been. Life in my early years was a silent movie, played within the confines of a home that felt more like a fortress. My family, bound by strict norms that bordered on the extreme, watched my every move, every word, and every breath I took. It was a life of muted colors, where expressions were guarded, and spontaneity was a distant dream. My grandmother, Eleanor, was the first crack in that rigid world. She saw the life I was living and decided it was no life for a child. With a determination that matched her compassion, she pulled me out of that house when I was 13 and introduced me to a world where love wasn't just a whispered word but an everyday reality. Under her care, I blossomed. I traded silence for soft laughter, restrictions for freedom, and fear for love. But the shadows of my early years lingered, shaping me into a shy, modest young woman, whose comfort zone was the small, safe world I had built around myself. Web design became my chosen path, a career that allowed me to weave my creativity into the fabric of the digital world while staying within the protective walls of my home. My laptop was my window to the world, a world where I could be bold in my designs yet safeguarded from the direct gaze of society. On my 30th birthday, Grandma Eleanor decided it was time for me to meet someone, a thought that both thrilled and terrified me. Through her network, she found Ethan, a man just a few years my senior, known for his charm and seemingly gentle nature. Our first meeting was at a local diner, a place where the aroma of coffee and the buzz of quiet conversations created a comforting backdrop. Ethan walked in, his presence like a new chapter waiting to be written. Lily, right? Your grandma's told me so much about you. Heard you're quite the artist with your web designs, Ethan said, his voice smooth, his smile easy. A blush crept up my cheeks, unaccustomed to such direct praise. Thank you, Ethan. That's kind of you to say. And yes, design is my passion. As we talked, a connection began to form, gentle and tentative, like the first rays of sun after a long night. Ethan's words were like a balm, soothing the years of conditioned caution and reserve. Lily, there's something about you. Your modesty, it's refreshing in this loud world. It's like discovering a quiet cove in a stormy sea, he said, his gaze holding mine with an intensity that stirred something deep within me. His words, so full of promise and understanding, touched a part of me that I had kept hidden, locked away from the world. You know, Lily, I've always believed that true strength lies in being yourself, in a world that tries to make you like everyone else. I see that strength in you, Ethan continued, his voice sincere and warm. The days following that first meeting with Ethan were like stepping into a new world, one where the colors were brighter, and life felt more vivid. Our encounters were simple but meaningful, centered around long conversations over coffee, walks in the park, and shared laughter that seemed to echo long after we parted. One brisk afternoon, as we strolled through the park with leaves crunching under our feet, Ethan turned to me, his eyes shining with an idea. Lily, you ever been to the old Wilson's farm? They've got this apple orchard, look straight out at a postcard in the fall. I shook my head, a smile spreading across my face. Can't say I have, Ethan. My adventures have been pretty limited to the digital world, you know? He chuckled, a sound that warmed me from the inside out. Well, guess it's about time we change that. What'd you say about going there this Saturday? They say there's nothing like picking apples on a crisp fall morning. And just like that, our quiet, comfortable routine expanded to include these little adventures. Each moment with Ethan felt like a step away from my old life, a life of restrictions and silence, into something more vibrant, more alive. The days turned into weeks, and the connection between us grew stronger, more profound. It wasn't just about shared interests or mutual attraction, it was about understanding, about finding someone who saw me for who I was and cherished that. One cool evening, as we sat on a bench watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ethan's voice broke the comfortable silence between us. Lily, I've gotta tell you, these past weeks with you, they've been something else. You've got this quiet strength, this grace about you. It's rare, and it's beautiful, he said, his words wrapping around me like a warm blanket. His compliment caught me off guard, and I felt a blush rise to my cheeks. Thank you, Ethan. I don't know what to say. You make it easy to be myself, to open up. He took my hand in his touch gentle yet firm. That's all I ask, Lily. For you to be yourself. Because who you are is pretty amazing. I was thinking, maybe, just maybe, we can turn us into something more, something lasting. His words hung in the air, a question and a promise all at once. I looked into his eyes, seeing not just the man I had come to know and care for, but a future, a possibility of a life filled with laughter, understanding, and love. I'd like that, Ethan. More than you know, I replied, my heart feeling lighter, more hopeful than it had in years. Life took a sharp turn when I moved in with Ethan and his mother, Mrs. Clayton. The house, which I had imagined would be a sanctuary of love and warmth, quickly revealed itself as a battleground of expectations and criticism. It was on the first morning in my new home that Mrs. Clayton laid down the law. I was in the kitchen, trying to make a good impression by preparing breakfast, when she walked in, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk. Lily, let's get one thing straight. You're part of this family now, and in this house, we have rules. You're gonna take care of the cooking and the cleaning. Got it? Her voice was sharp, leaving no room for protest. Taken aback, I could only nod. Yes, Mrs. Clayton. I understand, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes narrowed as she inspected the kitchen. And I expect things to be done right. I run a tight ship here. No slacking. With that, she left the room, leaving me to absorb the reality of my new life. Each day became a relentless cycle of household chores. I'd wake up early, cook breakfast, then clean, then work on my web design projects, and then cook again. It was as if my entire existence had been reduced to serving the needs of the house. Ethan, whom I had thought to be my partner and protector, seemed oblivious to the strain I was under. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, I decided to voice my concerns. "Ethan, I need to talk to you about something," I started, my hands nervously twisting the dish towel. He looked up from his laptop, his expression one of mild annoyance. "What's up, Lily?" "It's about your mom, and the housework. It's a lot. And I feel like it's all on me," I said, the words spilling out in a rush. Ethan's eyes went back to his screen as he shrugged. "Well, yeah. Mom's set in her ways. It's just how things are done here. You'll get used to it. But, Ethan, it's not fair. It's not right. I'm working too, and I have my own life. I'm not just here to cook and clean," I protested, feeling a spark of defiance ignite within me. Ethan sighed, a sound of exasperation. "Lily, don't make a big deal out of this. Mom's the boss of the house. Just try to keep her happy, okay?" His words felt like a slap, a stark reminder that my feelings, my exhaustion, were of little consequence in this household. The web of control in the Clayton household tightened its grip around me as the days passed. It wasn't just about the cooking and cleaning anymore. My modest earnings from web design, which I had cherished as my own, became the next target in the Clayton family's playbook of dominance. It was a typical evening. I was sitting at the dining table, finalizing a project on my laptop, when Ethan and Mrs. Clayton cornered me with a conversation I wasn't prepared for. "Lily, we need to talk about your work," Ethan started, his tone serious. I looked up, puzzled. "My work? What about it?" Mrs. Clayton interjected, her voice sharp and commanding. "Your money, dear. It's time you start contributing to the household. You live here, after all." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "But I do contribute, Mrs. Clayton. I take care of the house, the meals." Ethan cut me off. "That's not enough, Lily. We're talking about financial contribution. Your earnings should be going into the family account. It's only fair." The unfairness of it all hit me like a wave. "But that's my money, Ethan. I earn it. I have my own expenses, my own needs." Mrs. Clayton scoffed. "Needs? What needs could you possibly have that are more important than this family?" "No, dear, your place is to support this household, just like we support you." Ethan nodded in agreement, his eyes void of the understanding and warmth they once held. "It's decided then. From now on, your earnings go to the family account. I'll take care of the finances." I felt cornered, trapped. The little financial independence I had was being stripped away, leaving me more vulnerable than ever. "But Ethan, this isn't right. It's not fair. I should have a say in how my money is used." He shrugged, a cold, dismissive gesture that sent shivers down my spine. "Fair? Life's not fair, Lily. You're part of this family now, and this is how things work here." Mrs. Clayton's eyes bore into me, ensuring her message was loud and clear. "You'll thank us later, dear. We're teaching you how to be part of a family, how to be a proper wife." As they left me there, alone with my racing thoughts, the reality of my situation became painfully clear. My income, my hard-earned money, was now under their control. Trapped in the Clayton household, my life had become a never-ending cycle of servitude. The financial control Ethan and his mother exerted over me was suffocating. My earnings, once a source of independence, were now tightly gripped in their hands. The situation was unbearable, yet I felt powerless to change it. One day, I decided to seek solace in the one place I always felt understood, the web design forum. Typing away on my laptop, I poured my heart out to Sarah, a fellow designer I had befriended online. Sarah, I'm in a bad place. Ethan and his mom, they're controlling everything, even my earnings. I don't know what to do, I typed, the words on the screen blurring through my tears. Almost instantly, Sarah's reply popped up. Lily, that's not right. They're manipulating you. That's financial abuse, you know. Her words were a jolt of reality. Abuse? I typed back, the word feeling foreign yet painfully accurate. Yes, abuse. Lily, you need to protect yourself. Read up on psychological abuse and financial control. Knowledge is power, Sarah urged. Taking her advice to heart, I started reading. Books on psychology, articles on financial abuse, stories of people who had walked the path I was on. The more I read, the clearer the picture became. Ethan and Mrs. Clayton weren't just overbearing, they were abusers, using manipulation and control to keep me under their thumb. One evening, as I was absorbed in a book on psychological growth, Mrs. Clayton barged into my room, her eyes scanning the title in my hands. What's this nonsense you're reading, Lily? She demanded, her voice dripping with disdain. It's a book on personal growth, Mrs. Clayton, I replied, a newfound strength in my voice. She snorted, personal growth? Don't fill your head with such rubbish. Your place is here, taking care of this family, not reading silly books. But her words, which would have once sent me into a spiral of self-doubt, now bounced off me. I had begun to see through their game, to understand the dynamics of control and abuse. Ethan, your mother thinks my reading is rubbish, I said later that evening, hoping to find an ally in him. Ethan, however, was far from supportive. Mom's right, Lily. You're getting ideas above your station. Focus on your duties here. That's what's important. His words were a crushing blow, yet they only fueled my determination. It was clear now, I was alone in this fight. But I was no longer the timid, compliant Lily they thought they knew. The knowledge I had armed myself with was my weapon, and I was ready to use it. Life at the Claytons had pushed me to my limits. I had been enduring, silently suffering under the weight of their control and manipulation. But everything changed the day fate intervened in the most unexpected way. It was a regular morning, and I was out running errands, lost in my thoughts, when suddenly, out of nowhere, a car came speeding around the corner. Before I could react, everything went black. I woke up in a sterile hospital room, my body aching and my mind foggy. As my vision cleared, I saw Ethan and Mrs. Clayton standing by my bedside. But their expressions weren't of concern or worry, they were of irritation and anger. Lily, what were you thinking, wandering around like that? Do you have any idea how inconvenient this is for us? Ethan's voice was harsh, void of any warmth. Mrs. Clayton chimed in, her words sharp and cold. Yes, and now who's going to take care of the house, the cooking, the cleaning? You've put us in quite a bind, Lily. I lay there, stunned, not by the pain from my injuries, but by the sheer lack of empathy from the people I had been living with. I'm sorry. I managed to whisper, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Ethan's face twisted into a scowl. Sorry doesn't cut it, Lily. We need you back on your feet, taking care of your responsibilities. This little stunt of yours is unacceptable. Mrs. Clayton nodded in agreement, her eyes scanning me with disdain. Absolutely. And once you're back, we expect you to make up for the lost time. No slacking. Their words, their complete disregard for my well-being, lit a fire within me. It was the turning point, the moment I realized that I was nothing more than a convenience to them, a tool to be used and discarded at will. Enough, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. I'm not your maid, not your cook, not your ATM. I'm a human being, and I deserve respect, care, and empathy, none of which you've shown. Ethan's eyes widened in shock, clearly not expecting resistance. Lily, you're not thinking straight. You need to calm down and think about your duties, your place in this family. But I was done. Done with being told my place, done with being treated like a nobody. My place, I said, my voice steady, is not here, not with you. I deserve better, and I will have better. The doctor walked in at that moment, breaking the tension. He explained my injuries, the fractures, and the long road to recovery. Ethan and Mrs. Clayton's faces fell as they realized the implications, the weeks of convalescence, the medical expenses, and the absence of their obedient housekeeper. Ethan, his voice laced with frustration, turned to me. If you think you're going to sit back and enjoy a vacation at our expense, you're mistaken. If you're not back on your feet and fulfilling your duties in a month, consider this marriage over. For the first time, his threat didn't scare me, it liberated me. Ethan, I said, a smile tugging at the corners of my bruised lips, I'm ready for that divorce. It's the best news I've heard in months. Their shocked faces were the last things I saw before they stormed out of the room. Lying in that hospital bed, I realized the crash hadn't just broken my bones, it had shattered the chains that bound me. A couple of days after Ethan and Mrs. Clayton's disastrous visit, a nurse wheeled in a small cart with my personal belongings, a bag that Ethan had left for me. Among the items was my laptop, my gateway to the world and, more importantly, to my independence. As I slowly, painfully opened the laptop, the screen welcomed me like an old friend. I was about to embark on the most crucial project of my life, my liberation. I began by drafting an email to my lawyer, detailing the years of financial control, emotional manipulation, and the recent threats from Ethan and his mother. My fingers trembled, but with each word typed, I felt stronger, more in control. A few days later, Ethan came to visit, his demeanor a mix of anger and disbelief. Lily, what's this nonsense about a lawyer? You think you can take me on? He scoffed, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. I looked at him, my resolve unwavering. It's not nonsense, Ethan. It's the truth. I'm done being your puppet. I'm taking back my life, my money, my dignity. He laughed, a cold, harsh sound. You? You don't have the guts. You're nothing without me, without us. But I wasn't the old Lily anymore. Watch me, Ethan. You and your mother have controlled and used me for long enough. Those days are over. His face reddened, a vein throbbing in his neck. You'll regret this, Lily. You'll come crawling back. I shook my head, a small smile playing on my lips. I'd rather crawl through fire than come back to you. After Ethan stormed out, the days blended into weeks. My body was healing, but more importantly, my spirit was healing too. I spent hours reading, learning, and preparing for the battle ahead. The hospital room, once a symbol of my vulnerability, had become my war room. The day I was discharged from the hospital marked the beginning of my new life. Grandma Eleanor, frail but with a spirit as strong as ever, was by my side as I walked out of the hospital. Her eyes, filled with tears of pride and relief, told me all I needed to know. I was on the right path. Grandma, I'm scared, but I'm ready, I told her, my voice steady. She squeezed my hand. I know, my dear. And you're not alone. We're in this together. The journey back to Grandma Eleanor's house was quiet, but it was a silence filled with determination and hope. The old Lily was gone, and in her place stood a woman ready to reclaim her life, one step at a time. The morning of the hearing, Grandma Eleanor and I sat at the kitchen table, a silent understanding between us. Lily, you ready for this? She asked, her voice steady but laced with concern. I nodded, feeling a surge of strength from her unwavering support. I am, Grandma. It's time to put an end to this, once and for all. At the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense. Ethan and Mrs. Clayton were already there, their faces a mask of arrogance and disbelief. They still couldn't fathom that the once submissive Lily was challenging them. As we walked past them, Ethan's voice, cold and mocking, reached my ears. "You really think you can win this, Lily? You're just a nobody." I stopped, turning to face him, my gaze unflinching. "I am somebody, Ethan. And today, you'll see just how much you underestimated me." The court proceedings were a blur, with testimonies given and evidence presented. My lawyer was a pillar of strength, laying out the years of financial and emotional abuse with precision and clarity. Ethan and Mrs. Clayton's lawyer tried to discredit me, painting me as an ungrateful wife. But the recordings I had made, the meticulous records of their controlling behavior, and the financial statements spoke louder than their lies. As the judge pronounced the verdict, favoring me and granting significant compensation, the look of shock and defeat on Ethan and Mrs. Clayton's faces was a sight I would never forget. Outside the courthouse, Ethan approached, his demeanor now that of a defeated man. "Lily, please, let's talk about this. We can settle it without the compensation. You don't have to do this." I looked at him, the man I once believed would protect me, now a mere shadow of his former self. "No, Ethan. You had your chance. You chose to control and abuse instead of love and respect. This is the consequence of your actions." Mrs. Clayton, her pride shattered, joined in, her voice trembling. "Lily, please, I'm an old woman. Have some mercy." I shook my head, the final pieces of the emotional shackles they had bound me with falling away. "Mercy was what I begged for when you controlled every aspect of my life, Mrs. Clayton. It's too late for that now." As Grandma Eleanor and I walked away, the weight of years of oppression lifting off my shoulders, I knew that this was more than just a legal victory. It was the triumph of justice, the affirmation of my strength, and the beginning of a new chapter. But the story didn't end there. News of Ethan's and Mrs. Clayton's actions spread, reaching Ethan's workplace. His colleagues started looking at him differently, whispers followed him around, and soon, his position at work was demoted. He was a shadow of his former self, condemned and despised for his actions. Mrs. Clayton faced her own downfall. She found herself ostracized, her name synonymous with manipulation and cruelty. Decent society closed its doors on her, her past actions casting a long shadow over her present. As for me, life was opening new doors. It was a chance to start fresh, to build a life on my terms. The battle was tough, but it led to a new beginning, a future where I was no longer a victim but the author of my own story. The final reckoning was not just an end, but a promise of a new, brighter dawn.